Oh, hey, Tom. I wanted to connect some of your calls today back to that 1980 trip by John Connally to the Middle East to commit treason and felonies that helped swing the election to Ronald Reagan by telling the leaders of, I guess it was 11 Middle Eastern countries to communicate to Iran, not to accept the peace deal, which allowed Jimmy Carter to lose that crucial bit of support that could have changed the outcome of the election. And I think the lesson that I take from it, and to connect your calls together, you talked about the Vietnam War, you were talking about the Iraq War, you were talking about the 2004, election fraud. I just like to connect together because this is the time in a 12-year period at this crucial hinge point in our country's history that an election the outcome was potentially changed by the Republican presidential candidate's campaign coordinating felony and treason that ends up extending wars. So, I've called you before about the Chenault affair, and LBJ knew, and he kept quiet.
Right, that was the audio I played in the first hour.
Yeah, and I mentioned to you that Humphrey knew because he was told, and he made a decision not to tell the public because he thought we'd have a civil war if they understood the corruption.
Yep.
And
for people, if I can pause you right there, Patrick, for just a moment, just for people who may be tuning in, I probably only about 10% of the audience that was listening when I played this in the first hour are still listening, because that's just the nature of radio. About every 15 minutes, you see about a 10 or 15% turnover in your audience. This is a clip of Lyndon Johnson calling Everett Dirksen. He was the senior-most Republican in the United States Senate. He was arguably the most powerful Republican in the United States. He was an elder statesman. He was, generally speaking, a good guy, Everett Dirksen. I had and continue to have a lot of respect. He had this very deep, gravelly voice. And this, you're going to hear Lyndon Johnson saying what Patrick just said, which is, I don't want to get this in the campaign. He didn't want Americans to learn that Richard Nixon was committing treason because he thought it would harm the presidency. He thought it would harm the nation. This is Lyndon Johnson's call to Everett Dirksen.
Here's the latest information we got. The agent says that they just talked to the boss in New Mexico, and that he says that you must hold out. Just hold on until after the election. We know what Chew is saying to them out there. Yeah. We're pretty well informed on both ends. Now, I'm reading their hand, Everett. I don't want to get this in the campaign. That's right. And they oughtn't to be doing this. This is treason. I know.
Dirksen didn't say, no, it's not treason.
Tom,
he said, I know.
Tom, this is so important. Can I connect this up to the Iraq War? Because we're on the 20th anniversary.
Yep.
And, give me just a tiny bit of room here. The Vietnam War goes on 6 years because of this treason. So
That's
your
correct.
friend who called, the 71 draft, all those body bags coming home. My brother was in the counter-inaugural. Yeah, my brother was in the counter-inaugural, in the street, got arrested carrying caskets when Nixon was elected in 72. I don't think that Nixon would have bugged Watergate and committed all of those crimes if it hadn't gone secret and unprosecuted what happened. People who knew didn't bring it forward, including Hubert Humphrey.
I agree.
So then the question is, what did we do about it? Well, we did the church committee. We got rid of mass surveillance. My brother had a red file. The NSA was taping phones. We had a court suit. We got rid of that. We created FISA. All of these things to take back our democracy, to stop illegal wars like Cambodia and Laos that led to a genocide because we destroyed a government and destabilized with secret illegal bombing.
Yep.
So the idea was, let's stop that. Okay, well, did we learn our lesson? No, we didn't. Because William Colby was in the airport, the CIA director, getting this information, even if Reagan's campaign didn't know, and they went and John Connally and Ben Barnes met with Reagan. I don't believe for 2 seconds that they didn't know. But Daddy Bush was a CIA director, too. So what did Daddy Bush do? He had Cap Weinberger, Secretary of Defense, committing felonies, carrying through on their side of the deal to send arms to Nicaragua.
That's right.
And I stood up in a cape as... Yeah, well, yes, and I stood up in a cape, and we did the 42 of us, because 42 people had just been killed in Nicaragua, and we did the Grim Reaper at Harvard when he spoke, before we knew he was a felon, before we knew he deserved a jail cell. And then when I had my young son, after Bush was elected in 2000, we heard Daddy Bush, George H.W. Bush, say on Diane Rehm, and you can pull up the tape, that I always knew I was going to pardon them. So Ollie North had his conviction overturned, but Poindexter, who was the top guy in the White House, he got pardoned.
Yep.
And so that led directly to this impunity. And then the tapes came out that when the Iran-Contra thing was being hatched in the Reagan White House in 87, that Daddy Bush, former CIA director, was in the room, knew everything. He should have been prosecuted, but that was kept secret. So how does that tie together to today? Well, we got back to having NSA mass surveillance. We got back to having assassinations with drones. We had WMD lie take us into Iraq, and 4,500 Americans are dead from the Iraq war. 1 million related Iraqis dead, 228,000 from the war. And we destroyed their water systems. We killed all those children. And we didn't get accountability from the 80 situation. We lost the independent counsel law, so we couldn't prosecute Trump. This is a straight line of impunity.
Yeah. And it runs through the Republican Party.
Well, the Democrats went along with it, unfortunately, and they went along with the Iraq war, and they went along, my boss, Carl Levin, went along with getting rid of the independent counsel law.
Oh, geez.
And it was a terrible mistake. Moynihan went after the NSA because they spent $100 million putting together the office in Virginia where they were going to run their mass surveillance, and they hadn't told Congress. And he was head of intelligence, and he wrote a book on secrecy, and he made them destroy the building, take it down, repurpose it. And he would not let them create mass surveillance. And then Democrats and Republicans, Bush and Obama, made it legal, created a set of rules behind it, and we needed Ed Snowden to tell us it was happening. The Church Committee had already taken care of that.
You're right.
My boss, Colin Seitz, in the Third Circuit, was the chief judge on the appeals court for the Star Chamber for the FISA panel. They didn't grant those warrants. We had a collapse of the rule of law, and this 1980 arms for hostages secret deal to deny Carter a fair chance of winning, tied back to what Nixon did, is an example of where we went wrong.
Right. And it all paved the way for Trump and his criminality. I mean, here, this is a story from a couple of weeks ago that I was going to do on the air and never got around to. The headline is, DHS admits it tried to manufacture fake terrorists for Trump's political gain. This was an investigation that Ron Wyden did, that Chad Wolf was pulling together secret dossiers on people here in Portland. And they wanted to describe them as terrorists. They fully intended to, actually, and it just kind of got blown up at the last minute. But this was, and then Trump was going to use that as his justification for attacking the United States. In Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the hartmannreport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com. book today is Microtrends Squared by Mark Penn. The first chapter, The Building Blocks of Change Today, The Power of Microtrends. We live in a microtrends world. It's driven by granular, often opposite patterns of human behavior that seem small by eyes. We've identified these powerful patterns as microtrends, and the world is full of them. Together, they are the dots of a global impressionist painting that comes to life when you step back and look at it holistically. These forces have only become more impactful in recent years, and they've started to upend society. 10 years ago, when I first identified these patterns in change and microtrends, I saw a world of boundless opportunities. I was over-the-top optimistic about how microtrends would produce a new world of personalized products on our shelf, and how in Washington they would produce an even greater selection of fresh, first-rate political choices. Of course, that's not exactly what happened. Instead, the information age has given way to the disinformation age, in which fake information abounds. The nation founded on free speech is grappling with how to live with free speech in the era of the internet troll. The optimism around our economy faded with the unexpected crash of 2008, followed by a historically slow recovery over a decade. Only now is it recovering. Unparalleled consumer choice is leading not to the growth of more startups, but to the dominance of just a few internet companies, which are amassing more and more power on the basis of data gleaned from willing but unknowing consumers. And the older generations, who in their own youth, led a rebellion, have now dug in their heels against the politics and culture of today's new generations. What makes the microtrend such a powerful tool in this moment is that it can unpack and explain changes that we're seeing that otherwise make no sense. On the surface, for example, the middle class can seem to be shrinking, and this is alarming. But it is only by digging deeper and seeing that education is driving more people into the upper classes that we can come to understand these overall statistics at a more molecular level. Often, two diametrically opposed trends are occurring at the same time, which would be invisible in the averages, but which leap out when understood as the result of a cauldron of microtrends. Today in politics, for example, there is no overall ideological shift. Instead, one group of moderates became more conservative and another group became more liberal, causing society to become both more liberal and more conservative at the same time, essentially canceling each other out. This increased polarization then produces even more gridlock and confusion. We can see similar tugs and pulls throughout society. While one group seeks more technology, another one wants to sit in the Amtrak quiet car. Some can't sit through a 6-second commercial. Others spend hours and hours binge-watching TV. Some live in a world of globalization, while others yearn for a return to greater nationalism. To explain all this, we've borrowed from Newtonian physics. For every trend, there is a counter-trend. It's human nature in the information age. Every move or desire in one direction seems to inspire a counter-move by another group in the opposite direction. For every radical group, there's a new conservative group. For every new product in mobile technology, there are those sticking to the flip phone. Only by understanding the complexity of these developments can we make sense of a world that seems senseless, confused, and even jumbled. While in 2007, microtrends allowed you to navigate the changes of the day, now Microtrends Squared lets you better understand the emerging chaos as the seesawing of opposite forces fighting for dominance in the social, political, and cultural worlds. In the last decade, technology was able to exploit and even conquer the world of microtrends with its ability to customize products and our lives based on AI and big data. But even as these attempts have transformed our lifestyles, they've also led to some serious unintended consequences that have further clouded society. Microtrends disentangles many of these shifts and lies at the source of many battles for power that have disrupted our world today. As you'll see throughout this book, those ongoing battles will result in some very unlikely winners, losers, and shifts in the overall power match of society. While the technology behind increased personalization of goods and services has been providing us with more choice in our daily life, we've instead been making fewer choices, burrowing into comfortable silos. We expected that the advances in our ability to customize goods and services would open us all up to a new world of never-ending experimentation. A decade later, exactly the opposite has occurred, and our society has become increasingly polarized, with people finding choices they like and picking them over and over again. In 2007, Microtrends explained how the Starbucks economy had succeeded the Ford economy.
In the Ford economy, you could have any color you wanted as long as it was black. The aim of industry was to mass produce products at the lowest possible cost, and that meant standardization of goods. But the new economy of the 21st century was moving starkly away from that model, instead providing consumers with any color they wanted. The Starbucks economy was based on creating greater value through customization, even of simple products like coffee and tea. People everywhere became more individualistic in their tastes and were rebelling from carefully mowed lawns and white picket fences. The marketplace responded to these trends by allowing people to have it their own way, and they did. The theory was that more choice would result in a happier and more satisfied group of consumers. Variety would open consumers up to new experiences, in many ways bringing us closer together, allowing us to mix, match, and try out all sorts of new options. Something rather surprising happened, however, as consumers got more choice. The book Microtrends Squared.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Hey, happy Wednesday. In just a moment, Congressman Mark Pocan will be with us for the entire hour, taking your calls at 202-808-9925, Middays with Mark. In the second hour of our program today, when do we officially declare that the Republican Party has killed America? Seems like we're getting close. We'll talk about that. Also, the French hold their ex-presidents accountable. Sarkozy's conviction was just upheld by a French high court. Come on, America. Also, in the second hour of our program, Ron DeSantis allows anti-woke giveaway to Wall Street donors. He's literally handing hundreds of millions of dollars in Florida pension funds off to the very people who are stashing money in his campaigns. Indirectly through the Republican Governors Association. I'll tell you all about that in the second hour. In the third hour of our program, Anjeanette Damon is going to be with us. The ugly truth behind this national franchise, We Buy Ugly Houses, and really not just them. There's a larger issue here. Also, have you been arguing with bots on Twitter? It's a bigger threat than you think. New studies show that almost 50% of all online activity right now is bots. Amazing. And a crazy alert in our third hour. Jesse Waters wants you to be afraid of black people, not white supremacists. Right. But to start off the program, or to start off our hour, in fact, Congressman Mark Pocan is with us. He represents the 2nd District of Wisconsin in the U.S. House of Representatives. He's the member and chair emeritus of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. He's the co-founder and co-chair of the Labor Caucus, the chair of the Congressional Equality Caucus. Pocan.house.gov is his website. Rep. Mark Pocan, P-O-C-A-N, Rep. Mark Pocan is his Twitter handle. Congressman, welcome back to the program.
Hey, thanks, Tom. Glad to be here.
Glad to have you with us. So, am I reading this right, that Kevin McCarthy's demand, at least the only one that we know of so far, that first of all, over 200 pages of the 300-page proposed legislation are entirely devoted to fossil fuel projects, more drilling, more pipelines, reallow the Keystone XL pipeline, ban future Republicans and governors from banning fracking, prevent them from doing that. It's basically a wish list for them. And he wants to put work requirements on basically all social welfare programs. Is this including Social Security?
No, I don't think that, but I haven't seen that anywhere. You're partially right as far as what he's got in there. He also wants us, in addition to their bill HR1, which is like, Christmas and your birthday and Hanukkah and everything put together in one gift for the fuel, the big oil industry. He has the work requirement issues, but he also wants to go back to 22 levels of spending. Now that sounds innocuous, but there's a lot more to it. In fact, if you think about it, and I think it's important to explain this, when you look at government spending, a big chunk of it is non-discretionary spending. That means we can't legally touch it. That's Social Security and Medicare, for example. People's money they put into it, we're holding it as a public trust for when they need it. Remember, some Republicans wanted to make it discretionary so they could cut it, but you can't cut it right now because it's non-discretionary. That leaves discretionary funds. So out of this big pile of the federal budget, you're down to this. The Republicans have said they won't touch defense discretionary spending. That's over 50% of discretionary spending. What that leaves you with is this little piece that they want to make all their cuts to go back to 22 levels of spending, and that would be equivalent to a 22% cut. Now, that includes veterans benefits, housing, education, healthcare, the border security, all sorts of things. So you think about the hypocrisy. They pass a border bill, but they also pass a bill that cuts funding 22%. It's just, the problem really is, the reason that there's negotiations even going on is they're trying to negotiate a budget and the debt ceiling at once, because they can't put on paper their budget with these 22% of cuts, because no one would ever accept it as a reasonable, serious budget. So the president, the Democrats have a budget out there, and we're ready to deal with that through the appropriations process. But because they can't put pen to paper, because it would look so crazy to actually incorporate those cuts, because they'll say, well, I don't want to cut veterans or homeland. Well, then that means 30 or 35% cuts for everything else, right? They can't even put that on paper. They're trying to get around doing the hard work that we have to do, which is pass a bill with those kind of details and try to incorporate it into some kind of negotiation. So one, they're holding us hostage, the country hostage, that could be very pricey and cost people jobs and increased interest rates for home buyers and small businesses, and could make our stock markets tank, while they're playing this game of just not saying to their most crazy members, just look, you're not being responsible. We have to govern. But because Kevin McCarthy won't do that, that's why we're in this so-called negotiation right now.
Wow. We're talking with Congressman Mark Pocan. It's Middays with Mark here. He will be taking your calls in a few moments at 202-808-9925. Congressman, to what extent is Kevin McCarthy dancing to the tune of what I call the Sedition Caucus? These guys who voted against aid for Ukraine, they parrot Putin's talking points. Paul Gosar, Marjorie Taylor Greene, Lauren Boebert, Andy Biggs. I mean, you know the crowd. There's about a dozen of them that just seem like they're totally in the bag with Putin and completely interested in destroying America. My words, not yours, but. To what extent are they driving this process? Several of them have come right out and told the press that they're perfectly willing to see a default.
Yeah, right now he's their groupie, right? Because he gave away so many powers in order to have the business. He's a speaker, that he doesn't have some of the normal powers. And in that role, sometimes you have to be the adult and say to some of those more extreme folks, look, we have to pass a budget. We can't default on our debt. If you buy a home, you can't decide whether or not to mail the mortgage check in, because if you don't pay it, you lose your home and your credit's destroyed. It's no different for the federal government. So the fact that he doesn't stand up to them and allows them to be as outrageous as they are really means that, they're kind of the tail wagging the dog right now. But we know there's Senate Republicans who say we got to be responsible. The only entity that's not being responsible are House Republicans. And until he changes that tune, we're going to get closer and closer to a deadline.
Yeah. And now, looking at the congressional calendar, there are, Janet Yellen has said June 1st, roughly 2 weeks from now is D-Day, or Death Day. And yet there's only, I believe, 6 business days for Congress between now and then where both the House and Senate can act. The last time we got this close was in 2011. The last time Republicans thought that they would use this 1917 Liberty Bond Act to beat a Democratic president over the head. And, they ultimately worked it out at the last minute, but it caused a massive downgrading of the debt of the United States, which increased our interest payments, further added to the budget deficit. Previous ones, they've shut down the government for periods of time. I mean, how do you expect this to play out? Do you think that there's a real risk, not necessarily of a full-on default, but at the very least of serious damage being done to the United States by these guys?
Absolutely. I think the June 1st date is a little bit soft in that it's probably within a week of that date. Today, we started to sign a discharge petition. I was the 30th person to go down there. We need 218 members of Congress to sign a petition that would allow us just to do a clean debt ceiling lift like we've done 86 times previously, including 3 times, for Donald Trump. We would need to get all 213 Democrats, which I think will happen, and you need to get 5 Republicans, just 5 Republicans who privately have told us that they don't like what's going on. If they can just put their name to paper, we can force a vote. And quite honestly, it might be the life raft that Kevin McCarthy needs right now, because he's still appealing to that crazier element of his caucus. But it's the responsible thing to do is pay your bills. Even if we didn't lift the debt ceiling, you wouldn't change spending at all, because we've already spent the money that lifting the debt ceiling is all about. So it's so much of this rhetoric, I don't think many Republicans even understand what they're talking about. I serve on the Appropriations Committee, so I'm kind of living it right now. But I think they're going to get very close to that deadline. But with this discharge petition, by about the end of the first week in June, we could force a vote, which would still probably be in time if we can make that that's our fail-safe if we can't just get people to do the right thing for the right reasons.
Yeah, I totally get it. Before we're going to have to hit a break here in just a second, and then we'll pick up your phone calls for Congressman Pocan. But normally when we first start these conversations, I ask what's on your mind, and I neglected to do that today. Is there anything that you wanted to discuss, or share with our viewers before we get rolling?
This is what's on my mind right now. So we're talking about the same subject.
Yeah. So it's the debt ceiling and the possible destruction of the American economy. Chinese have to be just, President Xi has to be grinning and rubbing his hands. He wants the yuan to replace the dollar as a worldwide currency. This is not helping us.
I'm guessing he has a pinup of Marjorie Taylor Greene somewhere.
Yeah, there you go. And not in a bikini. 16 minutes past the hour. We'll be right back with Congressman Mark Pocan taking your calls. It's Middays with Mark on the Thom Hartmann Program.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Sorry to put that image in your mind. We'll be right back with your calls for Congressman Mark Pocan. And welcome back. Patrick in Chicago. Hey, Patrick, thanks for listening to the Thom Hartmann app. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan. Excuse me.
How's it going, guys? Thank you so much for doing this. Congressman, I just wanted to ask you, I understand that there's a rule that any sitting member of the House can challenge McCarthy's speakership at any time. And I'm just wondering, I asked about this before, and you said that it was theatrics. And I think that theatrics is something that the Democrats really need to do. So I'm just really wondering when someone's going to do this and get the attention and get the media on them, get the cameras on them so that they can bring all the other issues that are important. Thank you.
Yeah, Patrick, I don't think it's even just theatrics. I actually think it helps solidify their caucus if we do it. Right now they're threatening still to do it, depending what he does, if he does the right thing. I say, keep giving them the rope, so to speak, rather than, us doing something that helps solidify them, especially at a time we need at least 5 of their members, just in case, to be willing to do the right thing and sign a discharge petition. So I agree with you in general. We need to do more things that create media awareness around our position. And I think, unfortunately, the Republicans have been effective in saying there's some kind of a negotiation that should happen around the debt ceiling, when that's BS. And, 86 times we haven't done that to presidents. Why now? But I don't know if it necessarily would benefit in the way you think if we were to challenge him as speaker.
Amy in Madison, Wisconsin. You're on the air with Representative Pocan.
Oh, hi, Senator. Hi, Congressman Mark. I wanted to ask if Hakeem has those 2 discharge petitions, one for Soros and one for a clean debt ceiling, that he's going to start doing today. I thought they were ready.
Just for clean debt ceiling, I'm not sure the other one. If you meant the resolution on Santos, that doesn't require a discharge petition. There's an expulsion vote that'll be up. Republicans are saying that they're going to refer it. They're going to make a motion to refer it to ethics. But ethics already has him in front of them, and they haven't done anything. So, it's kind of like a way they're just trying to shuffle, the problem without actually dealing with George Santos. Tom, it's really important for people to know George Santos was the deciding vote on that bill they passed that would cut government spending 22% and would do all those things for big oil and put the work requirements in. He was the very last person to go up there and vote. So, they kind of need to keep him con man or not, huckster or not. And so that's a separate vote, Amy. But we did open up the discharge petition today. I was just on the floor. I was the 30th person to sign it. But we're going to get, hopefully every single Democrat to sign, and then find hopefully 5 Republicans who decide the economy is more important than their party.
Congressman, we just have 40 seconds. I understand this effort to unseat Santos is being brought by privileged motion. I don't know what that is. Can you just explain this to us?
Yeah, it just means we got to take it up within 48 hours. So it'll be coming up, but you can't do it like with normal bills. That's why it's a little different in structure, but it has to happen within 48 hours. We're going to vote on it today, but as we understand it, they're going to refer it to ethics. And like I said, ethics already has him before them. If they haven't done anything yet, why referring it a second time is going to do anything? Really, this is them just.
So McCarthy can kind of blow it up. He can reroute it.
Exactly, yeah. Because they're hugging George Santos hard.
Yeah, I totally get it. Okay, we'll be back in 60 seconds with more of your calls for Congressman Mark Pocan. Stay tuned. It is 21 minutes past the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program. It's Middays with Mark. We'll be right back. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. So Kevin McCarthy and the Republicans have been pushing legislation and ideas that would basically crash the economy. And a lot of people are kind of scratching their heads going, why would Republicans, who basically are owned by billionaires and big corporations, why would they want to crash the economy? Doesn't that hurt billionaires and big corporations? In fact, no, it doesn't. Billionaires and big corporations actually get richer and more profitable during economic crashes. The largest fortunes in America were made during the Great Depression, or some of them. Joe Kennedy, J. Paul Getty, they made a fortune because it was a buying opportunity. Everything was cheap because everything had crashed, so they were buying up stock and buying houses. They had cash. Also, they have more negotiating power with unions, with workers, with their vendors. There's all kinds of benefits to billionaires and big corporations of having a crash. So don't think the Republicans won't do it. There's a whole long rant about this over at HartmannReport.com. Check it out. 22 minutes past the hour, picking up your calls here for Congressman Mark Pocan in our Middays with Mark. Lamont in Indianapolis, you are on the air with Representative Pocan.
Yes, Representative Pocan, I was wondering if you, why is it so hard for Democrats to basically just give it out a general message? And I would like to make 3 points so they can, the way they should present their message. First of all, that Republicans basically steal from the middle class and poor and give to the rich. 2, they're not pro-life, they're just anti-abortion. And 3, which goes back to the first one, all they offer is hate because they don't want people to know about their real financial issues. Why is it so hard just to say that over and over again?
Yeah, I'll tell you, Lamont, I agree that people agree with us on the issues, right? You just put out 3, I think, categories where people largely agree with Democrats and Republicans are in the wrong spot. What we don't do enough of, and I know, Tom, you had my friend Ken Weber with Branding Democrats on your show. I just did his podcast yesterday. We don't brand ourselves as a party broad enough. Every candidate thinks that they're uniquely special, and we are uniquely special as individuals, but what binds us together are our values. And it is on those same issues that the public agrees with us on. If we did more branding broadly as progressives, as Democrats, where people agree with us, I do think we'd be more successful in messaging. But, unfortunately, sometimes Washington is a place where you don't want to get in between some politicians and a camera because, there's a lot of individual team players. a team concept would be much more significantly helpful for us in the long run.
Yeah, hopefully Hakeem Jeffries can help build that, like Nancy Pelosi did.
Tom, if I can,
Sure.
Hakeem has done a great job. Just this morning, listening to him, he's so succinct and clear, and he is very good at messaging. And I think we are moving to that very direction that people want us to be in. And he's such a good messenger. So I agree with you.
I get that sense. James in Redding, California, you're on the air with Representative Pocan.
Hey, Tom. Thanks for having me. Representative Pocan, I appreciate you wanting to lend the Republicans this life raft to maybe come back the way you spoke of earlier. But they don't seem to be going that way. And the 14th Amendment, it's supposed to be not questioning U.S. debt. Now, if you forget the debt ceiling at the moment, everybody in government has sworn an oath to uphold, protect, and defend the Constitution. Now, simply by bringing our debt into question, that seems to be a violation of the oath they've sworn, and might be the stick that might be necessary to force them to, in order to save their office or their name, to uphold the Constitution. Might be the possibility, because I don't know if it's a civil issue, a criminal issue, right. If it's something the president.
We're almost out of time here, James. Let's let Congressman Pocan respond to it. Thank you.
Yeah, James, I don't disagree with you that I think we should be exploring, and I think the White House is, the 14th Amendment. I think the feeling is, given how close we are to the deadline, that even if they tried to do that, you may still have some market issues and other things. And, I agree, it should be a long-term solution. I served on the Budget Committee my very first session here. I've always thought the debt ceiling limit vote was stupid, something that only Washington could come up with. It allows a small group of people to muck things up, and that's what's happening right now.
Congressman Mark Pocan is with us for the hour, taking your calls. Middays with Mark on the Thom Hartmann Program. We'll be back with more of your calls for Representative Pocan in just a moment. You can find his website at pocan.house.gov. You can tweet him at Rep. Mark Pocan. He's the former chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, and, the whole thing there. We'll be right back with Congressman Mark Pocan.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 08-9925.
It's Middays with Mark on the Thom Hartmann Program. Back with more of your calls in just a moment. Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Cokeland, The Secret History of Coke Industries and Corporate Power in America by Christopher Leonard. This is from the preface. On May 18th, 1981, 4 Wall Street bankers traveled to Wichita, Kansas. They went there to make an offer to Charles Koch, the CEO of an obscure mid-size energy company. The bankers from Morgan Stanley wanted to convince Koch to take his family's company public, offering shares for sale on the New York Stock Exchange. Their deal was squarely in line with the conventional wisdom of corporate America at the time. Going public was seen as a natural progression for companies like Koch Industries, offering them access to big pools of money and promising enormous paydays for the existing team of executives. All it required from the CEO was to surrender control. Morgan Stanley, in return, would collect a small fortune in fees. Charles Koch was 45 years old. He had run Koch Industries since he was 32 when his father died suddenly. He was trim, tall, and had an athlete's build. He spoke quietly in meetings and seemed almost passive. The bankers laid out their plan to take Koch public. They revealed what, to most executives at least, might have been the most significant detail. If Charles Koch agreed to the deal, he could earn $20 million overnight. The bankers seemed incredulous when they prepared a confidential memo about Koch's reaction. He does not want this cash, the memo reported. Charles Koch calmly explained to them why their offer made no sense. His company was breathtakingly profitable. It operated in vital, deeply complex corners of the American energy industry. During the 1980s, Koch Industries was the largest purchaser and transporter of U.S. crude oil.
It owned an oil refinery. It employed teams of commodity traders who bought and sold a wildly diverse menu of raw materials and financial products, from gasoline to paper futures contracts. This might have encouraged most CEOs to take their company public. Koch Industries, however, did not want outsiders to know how much money its traders were earning. Taking the company public would expose too many of its secrets. The memo said, certain of Koch's commodity traders are particularly worried that their high salaries, once disclosed to the public, would be used against them by their trading partners. Secrecy was a strategic necessity for Koch Industries. Charles Koch did not want to surrender it. He also didn't want to surrender control. He had a specific, clear vision of how to run his company, and he didn't need Wall Street investors to interfere. If the bankers expected Charles Koch to go along with the conventional wisdom of their time, then they, like so many outsiders, did not understand him. Beneath his low-key veneer, Charles Koch was, at his core, a fighter. He had unmovable ideas about how things should be, and he did not back down when challenged. When he was challenged by his own brothers for control of Koch Industries, he fought them in a bitter legal battle that lasted decades. When he was challenged by members of a powerful labor union during his first years as CEO, he fought them even as they committed an act of industrial sabotage that nearly destroyed Koch's oil refinery. When the FBI and the U.S. Department of Justice launched a criminal investigation into Koch Industries' oil gathering business, Charles Koch fought them with every legal and political tool at his disposal. When a liberal Congress and President Barack Obama sought to impose regulations on the fossil fuel industry to control greenhouse gas emissions, Charles Koch fought them in ways that changed U.S. politics. In each of these fights, Charles Koch prevailed. When Charles Koch dismissed the bankers in 1981, it was just a small skirmish in the larger war to control Koch Industries. After prevailing in that fight, he created a company that was true to his vision. He avoided the snares that entangled many publicly traded companies that report their financial results to investors every 3 months. Koch Industries didn't have to think quarter to quarter. The company thinks year to year. An internal think tank and deal-making committee called the Development Group will sometimes think through a business deal on a timeline measured in decades. This long-term view made Koch more nimble where other companies stumbled. In 2003, for example, Koch Industries bought a group of money-losing fertilizer plants when no publicly traded company was willing to take the risk. Today, those plants are as profitable as a broken ATM machine that spews out cash around the clock. Unlike publicly traded companies, Koch Industries does not pay out rich dividends to investors. Charles Koch insists on reinvesting at least 90% of the company's profits, fueling its constant expansion. This strategy laid the foundation for decades of continuous growth. Koch Industries expanded continuously by purchasing other companies and branching out into new industries. It specialized in the kind of businesses that are indispensable to modern civilization, but which most consumers never directly encounter. The company is embedded in the hidden infrastructure of everyday life. Millions of people use Koch's products without ever seeing Koch's name attached. Koch refines and distributes fossil fuels, from gasoline to jet fuel, on which the global economy is dependent. Koch is the world's third largest producer of nitrogen fertilizer, which is the cornerstone of our modern food system. Koch makes the synthetic materials used in baby diapers, waistbands, and carpets. It makes the chemicals used for plastic bottles and pipes. It owns Georgia Pacific, which makes the wall panels, beams, and plywood required to build homes and office buildings. It makes napkins, paper towels, stationery, newspaper, and personal hygiene products. Koch Industries owns a network of commodities trading offices in Houston, Moscow, Geneva, and elsewhere, which are the circulatory system of modern finance. The book, Kochland, by Christopher Leonard.
Hey, if you like the rants that I open the show with every day, they're typically published over at HartmanReport.com. Check it out. And welcome back. Congressman Mark Pocan is with us for the hour, taking your calls. By the way, if you're watching us or trying to watch us on Sling TV, it could be a problem. The network for a couple of days now, for some reason, has been breaking up across the Free Speech TV feed. It happened on Stephanie's show this morning. We saw it yesterday on Randy's show. So if you're trying to watch us on Sling without success, Just to let you know, we're also available if you go over to tom.tv, thom.tv. There's right there at the top of the page is our YouTube feed. You can also find it at youtube.com/Thom Hartmann. All run together. There's also freespeech.org. We're on DirecTV channel 348. We're on Dish channel 4379. We're on Apple TV. We're on Roku, and we're on Amazon Fire. If you want to watch us as television, those are all the venues. And of course, you can hear us as radio in a zillion places as well. But Sling has really been a mess for it's been problematic for a few weeks, but the last 2 days, and today in particular, I just heard from Louise that the signal is breaking up real badly. So those are your alternatives. Congressman Pocan is with us. Let's see, Jess in Cambridge, Minnesota. You listen on KTNF. You are on the air with Representative Pocan.
Yes. So, Representative Pocan, if you get the 5 Republicans to join to do the end around on the budget, do you think this might be an opening to start to break Trumpism?
It's a good question, Jess. I mean, Marjorie Taylor Greene has already tweeted out, because apparently she lives on Twitter, that if anyone signs it, that she'll work to defeat them in primaries. And so, it's difficult to get 5 people, even though privately they're saying things to us that they know it's wrong and we should do something. But I don't know if that would be maybe the ability to show how you can get some things done. This happened, when we reauthorized the Export-Import Bank. We did a discharge petition. There's one other time I'm forgetting offhand recently that it happened. Doesn't happen a whole lot, though. So maybe it wakes a few people up, but it certainly would show the weakness of Kevin McCarthy that, because of his own caucus, he can't do the job of being Speaker.
Everett in Detroit, Michigan. You are on the air with Representative Pocan.
Yes, sir. I would like to ask Representative Pocan about, if we can't afford to take care of our people, how can we afford to give away corporate giveaways? I mean, is corporate giveaways non-discretionary spending?
Great question.
Yeah. Tax expenditures is spending, right? And I think that's something worth repeating. I'll tell you, this is why the president has tried to talk about revenue in this conversation. Kevin McCarthy, that's a non-starter to him. But you're right. I mean, everything should be on the table if we're really going to talk about, how we're going to get to a better fiscal path. Republicans just want to talk about what they want to talk about. But it's really just because of their extremities. I mean, where's the problem? Where have we heard any outcry to have work requirements for SNAP, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program? That's the #1 program that keeps kids out of poverty. There's not like this groundswell out there, but they put it on the table because, some of their members, more extreme members, have decided it's a priority. That's the reason why this isn't really a negotiation, because they're just putting anything on the table when, one, there's an issue about if we don't pay our bills, it's going to have an impact, a ripple effect through the economy. But two, they can't put a budget together like the Democrats have, because they put such crazy ideas out there you can't actually put it to paper and show what you'd be cutting. They can only leave it more generically, and that's as far as they can get. So Kevin McCarthy has a big problem on his hands. How he resolves this, I'm not sure yet, but crashing the U.S. economy isn't the answer.
Morris in Long Beach, California. You are on the air with Representative Pocan.
Good morning, Congressman, and always hello to you, Tom, and everyone within the sound of my voice. Congressman, there's an international de-dollarization campaign that's taking place with an organization called BRICS. The countries are Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. There's a couple of other countries that are thinking about joining. Iran and Saudi Arabia. Now, Iran doesn't scare me, but the Saudi Arabia being a member does. And all of this is so they can keep their own currency, but they're going to exchange with this new BRICS currency. And our sanctions don't seem to be hurting the big boys. It hurts Cuba, but it don't hurt the big boys. Do you think that this campaign of de-dollarization can lead to a war? Thank you very much, Congressman. And again, good morning, Tom.
Thank you, Morris.
Yeah, I mean, I would hope not, and I don't think it would offhand, but I do think if we go up to the edge of this and somehow default on our debt or even get close, we've just proven the dollar to be less strong, right? And you're making reasons why an alternative currency could be a viable option for some countries. So, it's this whole game of chicken the Republicans are playing because they can't control their more extreme extremities of the House Republican caucus that puts us in jeopardy. But, I would hope that would never be something that put us to a place of war, but it should concern us that if we're not fiscally responsible right now in the next few weeks, we're making a case for an alternative currency.
Phil in Aurora, South Dakota, you are on the air with Representative Pocan.
Yeah, why even when the Democrats were in control, they didn't make the rich pay their fair share of taxes?
Yeah, well, Phil, we did. In fact, in the Inflation Reduction Act, corporations now have a minimum tax of 15%. There was no minimum before. That was a pretty big improvement. And a number of other measures we did in that bill actually helped to restore some tax fairness. I agree we should completely get rid of what we did in the Trump era, but we probably don't have the votes to do that right now. Remember last session, the Senate was 50-50 with Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema as 2 of the 50 so-called majority votes. But we actually did. And, I have to give a lot of credit to the Biden administration. I went to 4 states for Bernie Sanders when he was running for president. That was my choice. For some of the same reasons you're talking about. And yet Joe Biden's actually delivered on a lot of those things. And a number of us who are progressive are happy to see a number of the ways that the Biden administration did bring in revenue from people who traditionally haven't paid.
Catherine in Baltimore, you're on the air with Representative Pocan.
Yes, good afternoon. Representative Pocan, in light of SCOTUS gutting the Voting Act and John Roberts saying that racism is over, I'm very concerned that they have decided to take up this North Carolina case of racial gerrymandering. I'm wondering what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, well, I mean, we already saw what's happened in North Carolina in last fall when some political majorities shifted. A Supreme Court came in that basically is throwing out their maps, and they're claiming that they can pick up to 4 seats by gerrymandering in North Carolina. This is why the bill H.R. 1 that the Democrats had, not the Republican version this session, but the one that was the most comprehensive ethics, campaign finance, and elections law change we've had, was so important. Until you even that playing field, we're always going to be fighting whack-a-mole with special interests on a lot of other bills. So, elections have consequences. We just saw that in North Carolina. We just have to keep cognizant of that for every election cycle. The consequences can be very weighty.
Jill in West Collingswood Heights, New Jersey. You're on the air with Representative Pocan.
Hi, guys. I'm just commenting on the insanity of the work requirements. At the same time, of forced pregnancies, which will produce even more babies that will need health care and food. And if you have a sick, hungry baby at home, you can't work. I'm just throwing that out there.
Thank you, Jill.
Yeah, no, it's a great point, Jill. And I think this is something that Tom might agree with me on, is because Tom's been an employer with multiple different ventures over the years. I'm a small business owner for 35, and actually now 36 years. This is a dumb idea on multiple levels. I mean, yes, there are still some shortages on getting employees, and some of it's related to COVID, some of it's related to immigration, some of it's related to other issues. But to have a work requirement simply, first of all, most people who are getting these benefits are working already. So that is a fallacy that's out there. Just to force someone to work doesn't provide the job training so someone can actually have a career and do things. You're kind of talking about servitude in some ways. So some businesses who don't pay market rates might benefit, but is that really what we want? It's not an idea that there's actually like a groundswell asking for, other than some Republicans just want to be punitive, and that's why they've added it to the debate. So you're right. There's many reasons why it's not a good idea. And at the end of the day, I think the people who ultimately will get hurt are kids who, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program is the #1 program to keep kids out of poverty.
Yeah, and it's, if you're working for minimum wage, I mean, you can't afford to buy food. It's just that simple. That's incredible.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Congressman Mark Pocan is with us, taking your calls for the day, the Chair Emeritus of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. We'll be right back with more of your calls for him in just a moment. You can find his website at pocan.house.gov, pocan.house.gov. You can tweet him at Rep. Mark Pocan.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
It's Middays with Mark. Right back with more of your calls in just a moment. And welcome back. Charles in Portland, you're on the air with Representative Pocan.
Good morning, Congressman, and good morning, Tom, from all the fine folks at Time to Wire Automotive on a beautiful Portland day.
Well, thank you, Charles.
Hey, I wanted to ask something on the discharge petition and a different strategy for it. You talked about getting 5 Republicans to vote on the discharge petition, but that doesn't seem like it solves the immediate problem of the debt ceiling, but it doesn't solve the longer-term problem of the MAGAs in charge under Kevin. What if there were 5 rational Republicans who came across and it only takes 1 vote to challenge the speakership? Get the Democrats and 5 Republicans to put a Republican speaker in place who will do a clear debt ceiling bill and then hand the gavel back to Kev if they want to, or else they'd have a coalition that has marginalized all the radicals. I mean, as many rational Republicans might vote for that and start to marginalize those people on the eve of an election coming up where they're going to try to be perceived as rational. Is that a strategy that would be viable?
In a novel, if you're writing a novel, maybe, but I don't think in real life, because unseating a speaker in order to try to do this, if you simply need 5 people that say they're going to vote for a bill to sign the discharge petition so we can vote on it, that is the simplest route forward. And it would be specifically to lift the debt ceiling. So it would address our problem that we have at hand right now. So, to get people to actually vote against the speaker and then put someone else in place or put him back in, I just think all of that is a whole lot more maneuvering than having 5 people sign a petition to get a vote and then to vote with us.
Connor in Wenatchee, Washington, you are on the air with Representative Pocan.
Good morning, Tom, and good morning, Representative Pocan. There's all this talk about these work requirements. I'm just wondering why no one has brought up what the work requirements actually entail. I tried to, read through the bill last proposed, and it seems like it's 20 hours a week, which I think if we brought that up would, be totally unpopular, and people would know it's a step too far. So, yeah, why hasn't that been brought up yet?
Yeah, so I'll tell you what they're going off of is just the simplicity of the message, right? In Wisconsin, we had an advisory referendum in April. When we elected Janet Protasewicz, a progressive, to the Supreme Court, they had a resolution that basically said, should you have to have work requirements? There was no campaign around it. And on its face, because we have non-binding resolutions, people said yes, like 80%. And now Kevin McCarthy is using that as one of his reasons. But again, there was no explaining of it. There was no campaign about it. It was just a simple gut reaction. And Republicans work best on fear and, things like this where there's not a real dialogue. So I agree with you. I think if people really look at what they're about, there's going to be less and less support. But again, there's not like a problem out there that's got them trying to fix it by doing this right now. All they're doing is throwing sand in the cogs because they can't put a budget to paper. And the only way they can kind of justify their inability to govern is by doing what they're doing.
There you go. Congressman Mark Pocan taking your calls for the hour. We'll be back with more of your calls for Representative Pocan in 60 seconds. Stay tuned. It's the Thom Hartmann Program, helping you win the water cooler wars. We'll be right back. Hey, Hey, thanks so much for sharing our program and for reaching out to our stations and sponsors and letting them know that you're listening. It really means a lot to us. When I was a little kid, my grandmother had a piano, and I loved to play it. I was incompetent, but I was figuring out all kinds of stuff. And then I kind of got away from it and, went to school and things got busy and just lost track of it. Well, now there's this fascinating new study out of the University of Geneva, Switzerland, that is making me think maybe I should go back and learn the piano. What they found was that they took a group of 132 healthy older adults, retired, 62 to 78 years old. Half of them learned the piano, half of them took music classes without learning the piano. And what they found was that those who learned the piano actually had the strongest increase in their memory, in their mental competence, their mental faculties. Those who took the music classes also did well, but learning the piano was a huge step. So check it out. There's a whole long rant about this over at HartmannReport.com. Check it out. Congressman Mark Pocan taking your calls for the hour. Larry in Los Angeles, you're on the air with Representative Pocan.
Hi. In the last 42 years, every Democratic president has cut the deficit, and Clinton actually left us with a surplus. Every Republican president has increased the deficit, leading us to the day where we're seeing this problem we have with the national debt. What I'm hoping I will see one of these days when we have these meetings at the White House with the president, one of the congressmen should get out there and point this truth out to the American people, and also point out the fact that if we do what Kevin does, what the Republicans want us to do, we will crash the economy, just the way every Republican has crashed the economy, and then China will likely take over us as being the number one economy in the world. And in the last 42 years, no Democratic president has given us a recession. We're working on a record now that Kevin is trying to destroy. He wants us to have a recession. And somebody should point that out, that Kevin is trying to kill our economy.
Yeah, 10 of the last 11 recessions happened under Republican presidents. Congressman?
Yeah, Larry, there you go with facts and figures again. You're right. You're completely right? And that's one of the talking points I think we need to get out there. The other one that I think is really important, Larry, is of our nation's 240 years history, 240 plus year history, 25% of the debt accumulated over 240 years was accumulated during the Trump presidency, largely because of the tax cuts for the wealthiest, where 83% of the money went to the top 1%. So for all this rhetoric around debate of deficits and debt, under Ronald Reagan with Republicans, 25% of it was created just in that one administration. And I think that's another important talking point.
Yeah, amen. Brian in Beaverton, Oregon, you are on the air with Representative Pocan.
Hello, Congressman Pocan. I was wondering is Louis DeJoy going to be fired? There should be two people that can be replaced right now on the board. Why isn't Biden just replacing them? And also, what is the point of having a debt ceiling voted on if that the Republicans are just going to use it as leverage in a hostage crisis every couple of years? What was the point of even voting on it in the first place? Thank you.
Yeah, so let me take the first one just quickly. I have to get information and get back to folks because I know it was contingent on the Postal Board of Governors that has the ability to do it. But I agree. I think even by last December, the president should have had the ability to appoint someone. So
yeah, there are two members who have overstayed their welcome, basically.
So I'll get back to folks with an update on that because I know it gets asked on a fairly regular basis, including in my district. To the second point, I mean, ever since I've been in Congress, my first session 10 and a half years ago, I was on the Budget Committee the first time this came up. It's something that only Washington could create, a completely idiotic second vote about after we've approved spending and spent it through a congressional vote and the appropriations process. We have the second vote that lifts the debt ceiling because it allows literally a handful or two of people to muck up the whole process. And, I think we should get rid of it completely. I support the use of the 14th Amendment because I think that actually states that you shouldn't have this second vote. But I don't know the logic to it at all, Brian, so I'm with you on that.
I can share it with you if you'd like.
Sure.
In 1917, Woodrow Wilson needed to raise money for World War I, but the Republicans were opposed to our involvement in the war. He pushed through the what was called the Second Liberty Bond Act, which allowed the federal government to sell bonds directly to the public to finance the war. And the compromise that he had to make with the Republicans was to put a cap on how many of those bonds could be sold, which was in effect a cap on how much debt the United States could go into. That cap then was put into law, and it gets, and it's been lifted, 80 some odd times since then, since 1917. But it was unique to the Liberty bonds at the time. I mean, there was a certain amount of logic to it when it first went into law. It's a complete anachronism now.
Yeah. No, and there are many of us, including the ranking Dem on the Budget Committee, Brendan Boyle, who think it's time is well overdue to get rid of it.
Yeah, amen. And in fact, I would argue that it has been, that the first time Congress appropriated money after that it got ruled invalid, but that's a whole constitutional argument. Okay, well, one last call here. We're coming up against the end of the hour. James in Hollywood, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Congressman, I understand there's a Republican voter suppression going on in Wisconsin. I would ask you if you would go to Madison and University of Wisconsin and numerous, and let them know of the gerrymandering and that Republicans are trying to destroy democracy.
Thank you, James. Congressman, your thoughts? We've got about 30 seconds.
Yeah, James, that's my district. And that's, in fact, right now we're hoping with the new Supreme Court justice that there'll be a legal challenge to our heavily gerrymandered maps, and we can change that. So that's actually hopefully in progress right now, and it'll be good for the state of Wisconsin to have fair maps across the congressional and state legislative areas.
Congressman, thoughts on where we should be focusing our activism over the next week or two?
I don't care who your member of Congress is. They need to hear about lifting the debt ceiling and don't destroy the economy. Put those calls in. That's probably the most important thing.
Yeah, and that comment line number, the switchboard for Congress is 202-224-3121 if you want to reach out to a member of Congress. Congressman Pocan, thank you so much for being with us again.
Yeah, of course, Tom. As always, thank you.
My pleasure. It is. Thank you very much. We'll be back with the second hour of our program. Does everything Trump touches die? Yeah, there's a whole bunch of stuff out there. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the HartmannReport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com.
We say fight back!
book for the book report today. Our book for the book report today is Taking Bullets, Terrorism and Black Life in 21st Century America, Confronting White Nationalism, Supremacy, Privilege, Plutocracy, and Oligarchy, a Poet's Representation and Challenge by Haki R. Madhubuti. He writes, this is from the chapter, page 27, the chapter Terror in the Midst of Prayer and Empire. In our perpetual state of national mourning, where our eyes are watered out and our hearts cease to heal at the rate the Creator meant them to, we hold hands in profound silence as we remember the Mother Emanuel 9 of Charleston, South Carolina, those 9 mothers, fathers, sisters, and brothers. Even before burying, before black earth covered their caskets, too many ministers, media pundits, and plain white and black folks downgraded the terror that quickened their deaths of our finest in this land to the mental illness and race hatred, in quotes, of a single young white man. He may have acted alone, but he was not alone in his thinking, encouragement, gathering of arms, warped consciousness, confirmation, or ahistorical views, and yeses from the millions in the nation who proudly wear and display the Confederate flag above their hearts and fly it in all of its traitorous glory over a state capitol and other institutions. Again, we find ourselves at war with history and culture, entertaining another call for a national conversation on race and a president weary of trying to make sense of and comfort the grief-stricken nation with words from the highest office of the land. This was written while Obama was president. These are the facts, not an opinion or the ignorant ranting of compromised preachers and television pundits. A 21-year-old white man, a citizen of South Carolina, walked into the sacred and spiritual home of the Emmanuel African Methodist Episcopal Church of Charleston, the historic home of black liberation fighter Denmark Vesey, and fatally killed 9 of its members, including the pastor, during Bible study. This was a pure act of domestic terrorism. A modern-day lynching by a young white nationalist who coolly and calmly assassinated 9 black members of Mother Emanuel. Domestic violence and acts of terrorism are on the rise in the United States, as detailed by Charles Kurzman and Daniel Schanzer in their New York Other Threat, where they state that, quote, the main terrorist threat in the United States is not from violent Muslim extremists, but from right-wing extremists, end quote. In their national research, local police agencies across the country identified, quote, the militias, neo-Nazis, and sovereign citizens as the major threat the nation faces in regard to extremism, end quote. All of this is homegrown with international connections. Morris Dees and J. Richard Cohen of the Southern Poverty Law Center also writes in the New York Times article, Racists Without Borders, that, quote, Americans tend to view attacks like the mass murder in Charleston as isolated hate crimes, the work of a deranged racist or a group of zealots lashing out in anger unconnected to a broader movement. This view we can no longer afford to indulge. When, according to survivors, Mr. Roof told the victims at the prayer meeting that black people were, quote, taking over the country, he was expressing sentiments that unite white nationalists from the United States and Canada to Europe, Australia, and New Zealand. Unlike those of the civil rights era, whose main goal was to maintain Jim Crow in the American South, today's white supremacists don't see borders. They see a white tribe under attack by people of color across the globe. The end of white rule in Rhodesia, now Zimbabwe, and South Africa, they believe, foreshadowed an apocalyptic future for all white people, a white genocide that must be stopped before it's too late. End of quote. The internationalization of terrorism is not a foreign theory in today's social media world. Dees and Cohen will be speaking at a conference in Budapest about this transnational white supremacism that is emerging as the world grows more connected technologically. The message of white genocide is spreading. Also, David J. Whitaker's Terrorism, Understanding the Global Threat, gives another view. Clearly, our rush to forgive this mass murderer within 96 hours of this supreme tragedy is misguided, anti-human, and does not allow for properly grieving the fallen. As perfectly scripted, displaying the permanent effectiveness of Christian acculturation on the Sunday, June 21st, 2015 morning services at Mother Emanuel Church, the black Christians out-Christianed their white brothers and sisters. Before the morning sermon, the presiding elder, Reverend Norvell Goff Sr., found it necessary to thank the local, state, and federal law enforcement agencies for doing their job. He also stated, quote, "A lot of folks expected us to do something strange and break out in a riot. Well, they just don't know us. We are people of faith," end quote. I find this statement inappropriate, insensitive, and ahistorical, implying, whether he meant it or not, that the recent uprising and rebellions in Ferguson, New York, Cleveland, and other parts of the nation were riots and did not include black people of faith, and that somehow they were strange in their social, political, and economic activism. Informed people do not riot against injustice or white terrorism. They study, organize, and strategically struggle at all levels, in the streets, on the campus, in front of the White House, and in corporate boardrooms. Dylan Roof his stated intentions were to start a race war, and informed black leadership understands that we cannot pray this away or appeal to any law enforcement agency that all across the country, including Charleston, has been seriously compromised. To label black reaction to murder, terrorism, deep unemployment, substandard housing, etc. as riot is to blame the victim. The book, Taking Bullets.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Once again, we're having technical problems over on, Free Speech TV is having technical problems on Sling TV and only on Sling. So if you're watching us on Sling and the show is breaking up, you can find Free Speech TV online at freespeech.org. You can find us on DirecTV on channel 348. You can find us on Dish Channel on channel 4379. We're on Apple TV. We're on Roku TV. We're on Amazon Fire TV. And you can find our live YouTube feed over at tom.tv, thom.tv. And, and of course, if you're listening to us on the radio or anything like that, all is good. So a lot of stuff to talk about in this hour, too. When do we officially declare that the Republican Party has killed America? I mean, this is, I think, one of the biggest questions facing America right now. Rudy Giuliani, it was learned yesterday as a result of this lawsuit from this woman that he just relentlessly was sexually assaulting, who was in his employ. She has sworn under oath and under penalty of perjury that he told her, first of all, he hired her to exploit business opportunities, to find business opportunities for his law firm. One of the business opportunities that he told her that she should be tracking down are people who had committed and been convicted of felonies who wanted a pardon. And Giuliani told her that they were selling pardons, him and Donald Trump, for $2 million each, and they were splitting the money 50-50. Now, that is an absolute echo of a story in the New York Times from 2 years ago, in which John Kiriakou, the former CIA officer who was convicted of, I believe, spying or something close to it, but in any case, he was convicted. He was approached by Rudy Giuliani, who offered to get him a pardon for $2 million. And what he told Giuliani was, all I'd get back is my government pension. He wasn't going to jail. All I get back is my government pension. That's probably worth about $700,000 throughout my lifetime. And you want me to pay $2 million for it? Even if I had $2 million, I wouldn't do it. So, but that was a story that was in the New York Times 2 years ago, that Rudy Giuliani and Donald Trump together, between the two of them, that they were selling pardons. So this is not something new. And as far as I can tell, not a single elected Republican has commented on this story. Not one has condemned it. Why? Because corruption is now officially the Republican Party's brand. The ideals of America are, to these guys, really just nothing more than a joke. I mean, you've got Republicans running around going, oh my God, Hunter Biden made $10 million while he was working for Burisma and doing this and doing that. Well, Jared and Ivanka made $640 million while they were in the White House. And Hunter was never in the White House. He was never an advisor to the president. They had formal positions. And then, according to several reports, Jared sold intelligence, U.S. intelligence, to Mohammed bin Salman that he used then to overthrow the government of Saudi Arabia and declare himself the leader. And he's been paid $2 billion for that. Donald Trump himself is taking what has been described as a huge amount of money from the Saudis for the so-called Live Golf Tournament.
I mean, this is what the Republican Party has come to. They lack any core beliefs. They have no values at all other than supporting right-wing billionaires, keeping their taxes low, and supporting the fossil fuel industry. I mean, if you look at the 315-page, Limit, Save, and Grow Act, this is the piece of legislation that Kevin McCarthy and the Republicans have proposed and put in Congress, saying that they'll raise the debt ceiling. 31 words out of the 315 pages lift the debt ceiling. 275 of the 315 pages are dedicated exclusively to things the fossil fuel industry wants. That includes ending all the green energy provisions of and subsidies in the Inflation Reduction Act, fast-tracking new fossil fuel infrastructure, reinstating the Keystone XL pipeline permits, blocking Joe Biden or any future president from banning fracking, and selling off federal lands for pennies on the dollar to drillers, to oil drillers and to coal miners. And that's just a little bit of it. I mean, virtually across the board, what we have is that, Republicans are telling the rest of us to just go screw ourselves. They really don't care how many of our kids die from guns, or how many of our queer children die from suicide, or how many women die from pregnancies that are unwanted, or even just, crisis-based. At the same time that Democrats are trying to reduce student debt, expand Medicaid coverage, strengthen Social Security and Medicare, expand coverage for food stamps and housing support, at that same time, Republicans are demanding deregulation for dirty industries and to make Donald Trump's tax cuts for billionaires permanent. This is just so wrong. This is, and where did all this come from? Well, basically it all goes back to the U.S. Supreme Court, to 5 corrupt Republicans on the U.S. Supreme Court, being led by Lewis Powell back in the day, this faction, nowadays being led by Clarence Thomas since the 1990s, basically just saying that we're going to change the rules. We're going to make it so that bribery is no longer a crime, at least when it comes to politicians. Now, if you try to bribe, if you go to your local bank and say to the teller, "Hey, I'll give you $50 cash if you'll slip me a couple of $100 bills," or if you go to a auto parts store and say, "Hey, leave a couple tires out back for me and I'll pick them up. Here's $200 cash." If you do that kind of bribery, you still go to jail. But if you say to a politician, I'll kick $1 million into your super PAC. In exchange for that, I would very much like it if you would promote a tax cut for me. That's completely legal. I mean, you can't literally quite say it like that, but you could certainly do it like that. Thanks to 5 corrupt Republicans, now 6, on the Supreme Court, every single one of them. You got Leonard Leo, who parlayed his assembly line of hard right and neo-fascist judges into $1.65 billion. He was recently outed for what sure looks like a bribe to Ginny Thomas. At the time that the Supreme Court was trying to decide what to do about the Voting Rights Act of 1965. The Voting Rights Act, for goodness sakes. There was this group called the Judicial Education Project that had an amicus brief, a Fred of the Court brief before the court, demanding that the court gut the Voting Rights Act so that Republicans could start shutting down polling places in black neighborhoods, make it harder for black people to vote, throw black people off the voting rolls, all those kinds of things. And what do? Well, Leonard Leo has money, it looks like about $100,000 at least, from the Judicial Education Project, funneled through Kellyanne Conway's polling company, given directly to Ginny Thomas, with a note that says, make sure that Ginny Thomas's name is not associated with this. It sure looks like that, like it's a bribe to me. And guess what? Clarence Thomas did not recuse himself even after his wife took this money from this group that had one of the amicus briefs in this case. Instead, he was the tie-breaking vote to let Republicans go on a vote suppression, on a black voter suppression spree. I mean, since just that one decision,
where it looks like Leonard Leo bribed Ginny and Clarence Thomas with $100,000 just since that one decision. Republican governors have shut down over 2,000 polling places in black and Hispanic neighborhoods. They have gerrymandered numerous black elected officials literally right out of existence, as elected officials. They have purged over 16 million mostly black and Hispanic votes from the voting rolls. And as a result of this, states that were purple, Texas, Georgia, Ohio, Florida, have now become bright red. You've got, states like Florida and Texas where they're arresting black voters. You got black voters who are terrified by this. And it's showing. You saw a drop of almost 1 million black voters in the last election in those two states as a result of this. And then, of course, billionaire Harlan Crow gets in on the act and, starts giving millions of dollars in freebies and gifts to Clarence Thomas. Sam Alito's taking speaking trips to Europe, luxury 5-star trips. Brett Beerbong Kavanaugh gets his debts and his house paid off. Amy Coney Barrett won't recuse herself from cases where her father's oil company, Shell Oil, is involved. John Roberts' wife earned over $10 million setting up law firms that argue before the Supreme Court, with lawyers that are friendly to the Robertses, essentially. Or that, at least that's how it appears. And a lot of this, all this money and all these gifts and favors that are being showered on these Supreme Court justices, David Sirota and Andrew Perez make the point that this is not to get specific outcomes. This isn't like just bribes. This is to keep them in the conservative circle. Republicans appointed, Dwight Eisenhower appointed Earl Warren to the Supreme Court. Earl Warren turned into a liberal. He appointed William Brennan to the Supreme Court. William Brennan turned into a liberal. John Paul Stevens was appointed to the Supreme Court, I believe, by Richard Nixon. He turned into a liberal. David Souter was appointed to the Supreme Court by George Herbert Walker Bush. He turned into a liberal. This is an effort to prevent that from ever happening again. Because once these judges have lifetime tenure, they can actually do the right thing, unless they've got billionaires pouring money on them. So here we have, and then as a result of Citizens United, for example, over $1 billion was poured into the 2022 election. Much of it actually just billionaires spent $1 billion in the 2022 election. And in just the 3 states where they elected Republicans, Ohio, North Carolina, and Wisconsin, J.D. Vance, Bud, and Ron Johnson, quote, this is, from Americans for Tax Fairness, quote, Republican billionaires outspent the much smaller pool of Democratic billionaires by at least 9-1 in each race. In each race. I mean, this is what Jimmy Carter was talking about when he was on this program about 5 years ago and said, under Citizens United, America has just become a place with unlimited political bribery. It's now an oligarchy rather than a democracy. We've got Nazi-aligned militias or Republican-aligned openly Nazi militias stalking our streets of our cities. You've got GOP donor Wall Street hedge funds could own as many as 40% in America by the end of this decade. Climate change is killing thousands of Americans every year. Working people can't buy food because the minimum wage hasn't been raised in forever. The rights of women are under attack in state after state. Our kids are dying in an epidemic of suicide. Massive, unregulated, Republican-leaning social media companies. When do we say the Republican Party has killed America? What say you?
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Media support group for We the People. I'll be right back. And welcome back. 18 minutes past the hour. Jim in Valley Center, California. Hey, Jim, what's on your mind today?
Well, when you had Representative Pocan on, it made my blood boil because as 2 retired teachers, we used to pay approximately $6,000 to $12,000 a year with taxes off a W-2 and normally get a little bit back or have to pay a little bit. This year, or the last 2 years, we've had to pay close to $30,000 each year because of the deductions were taken away, such as interest on your house over $10,000, We live in Southern California, so the houses there are very expensive and the loans, mileage taken away. So what I'm frustrated at is I see these billionaires getting all these fruits, and all we get are the pits.
Yeah, the average American billionaire is paying 3.4% income tax right now. And I'm guessing...
and you're going to laugh at this.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry. Well, when I was at my tax accountant, we ended up paying close to 20%, 25% of our income. And I said, well, the billionaires seem to pay a lot less. And he says, you know it.
Yeah.
So you're right.
Yeah. It's a travesty. It's just an absolute travesty. It is so very wrong. Jim, thank you for the call. Pete in Seattle. Hey, Pete, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, I may have had my head under a rock for the last few years, but I wanted to ask about, I've never heard the argument that Social Security, which on my understanding is being thrown into the general fund right now, and they do apparently write it down in the trust fund account, but it's going into the general fund, and McCarthy wants to cut Social Security. If they want to do that, then doesn't that can we change the argument to be that is now our most regressive income tax? So all of us who make less than the minimum pay income tax on 100% of our income.
Yeah.
Whereas if you make over the whatever the limit is, 125, 140,000, that you don't pay any taxes on that income.
Yeah, there's a couple things there, Pete. Number one, yes, Social Security is one of our most regressive taxes, because if you make under $160,000 a year, you pay Social Security tax on 100% of your income. If you make $1 billion a year, you pay Social Security tax on probably less than 1% of your income. So number one. Number two, the Social Security has always been part of the general fund. In other words, it's always drawn money out of the general fund. It's kind of a bookkeeping trick to say that there's a Social Security trust fund. That was the whole Al Gore lockbox thing in the 2000 election. Al Gore wanted to segregate Social Security funds so that they couldn't ever be attacked. That has not happened. There was one other point that I was going to make based on where you started. What was the first point you made when you called?
Well, I'm wondering how we can change the argument so that I think most of us.
I recall. Kevin McCarthy doesn't want to cut Social Security. Just to be accurate, it's not that he wants to cut Social Security. He wants to cut the number of employees that the Social Security Administration has. So he wants to make it so that when you turn 65 and you try to sign up for Social Security, instead of being able to make a phone call or show up at the office and do it in 10 minutes or an hour, he wants to make it so it's going to take you weeks, and it's going to be an enormous hassle, and you're going to be seriously pissed off about it, and you're going to be saying, get rid of those SOBs. That's what he's trying to do. I got to run, Pete. Change starts with you. You can be calling your Democratic or Republican representatives to let them know what you think by calling 202-224-3121. It's the Capitol switchboard. It'll get you right through to them. So remember the John Durham investigation in which he said, the FBI never should have looked into Donald Trump's connections to Russia. And I'm scratching my head going, how can he even think this? I mean, the guy that Donald Trump hired as his first campaign manager, Paul Manafort had taken $66 million from oligarchs associated with Vladimir Putin to install Viktor Yanukovych as the dictator of Ukraine. $66 million. He took money from, he was paid $1 million by the dictator of Zaire, back when it was Zaire, to develop a strong relationship with Moscow. And when finally they threw Yanukovych out of Ukraine, that was in 2015, what did Manafort do? He came to the United States and he said to Donald Trump, well, let me help you, while he's taking money from Moscow. I mean, if nothing else, that should have been a starting point, a huge starting point for the FBI. There's a whole rant about this over at HartmannReport.com. Check it out. That's the hour. Dave in Evanston, Illinois. Hey, Dave, what's on your mind?
Hey, Tom. Hey, like you, I believe
if we get money out of politics, it's going to go a long way to shoring up and saving our democracy.
I think it's 90% of our problem.
Right, and legislating out Citizens United would go a long way in that. So yesterday, I like I do every once in a while, went over to the Fox News website to see what they're talking about and see what their talking points were. And on their front page, they had an article about some lefty hedge fund guy who controlled a whole bunch of, dark PAC money for left-leaning causes and stuff like that. And it made me wonder, it made me think, like, hey, maybe, if we can amplify this discussion and make it like the left is throwing all this dark money, maybe people on the right will get angry and go and let them think that, overturning Citizens United was their idea.
Yeah, I get what you're saying, Dave, because it is, it's a form of corruption that cuts both ways. The problem is anything that we on the left say doesn't get heard by people on the right, number one. Number two, those who might hear it, the sophisticates on the right, the politicians and the commentators and the chattering class, the talk show hosts, they all already get that right-wing billionaires give roughly 9 times what left-wing billionaires give, at least, and not to the campaigns, the official campaigns, those tend to be about 50-50, but into the dark money cycle, which is where most of the political money is nowadays. So, that I like the idea, it's like, trying to do jiu-jitsu, trying to turn it around and get them on your side, but I don't think it's going to work. They know the big money owns our politics. And frankly, Dave, we have to admit, it's not just Republicans. There are these Democrats who call themselves corporate problem solvers. We solve problems for billionaires and corporations, and we're Democrats. There's a bunch of them. Jared Golden is one. Josh Gottheimer is another. We used to have one here in Oregon, Kurt Schrader. We got rid of him in the last election cycle. So, it's a big problem right across all the parties. But I think it's going to take more than that. I think we just need to make a strong appeal. I think the average person gets it, that money in politics is corrupting. And that needs to be our message. Bribery should not be legal. The Supreme Court was corrupt itself, and it corrupted America. And it needs to be undone. And we tried to undo it. I mean, H.R. 1, the For the People Act, would have undone a lot of it. But for Manchin and Sinema.
The Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
It's 27 minutes past the hour. Back with your call. Actually, I got 2 stories to share with you, and then I'll be picking up your calls in just a moment. Stay tuned.
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Under the Influence, Putting Peer Pressure to Work by Robert H. Frank. And I'm reading from the prologue. That we are more closely connected to one another than most of us realize is an old idea. An important variation dates from 1929, when Hungarian writer Frigyes Karinthy published a short story entitled Chains. 2 of the story's main characters speculate that any 2 living people can be connected by a chain involving no more than 5 acquaintances. That some such chains exist is hardly surprising, since most of us can think of people in distant locations to whom we're connected through a small number of intermediaries. The man bites dog aspect of Karinthy's conjecture is that almost any 2 people, A and E, could be linked by a chain like A knows B, B knows C, C knows D, who knows E. One of the first systematic attempts to test this claim came in the 1960s with a series of experiments by the psychologist Stanley Milgram. In it, he sent packages containing a small booklet to 96 people chosen at random from the Omaha, Nebraska telephone directory. His cover letter asked them to try to forward the booklet to a specific residence of Boston, Massachusetts, through a chain of personal acquaintances. He told them the name and address of the Boston resident, that he worked as a stockbroker, and that the first person in their chain should be somebody they knew on a first-name basis. Milgram also advised them to choose someone they believed, presumably based on the target's location and occupation, could be socially closer to the target than they were themselves. Subsequent recipients in the chain were asked to forward the same instructions. Many of the Omaha recipients undoubtedly tossed Milgram's booklet in the trash, so it's remarkable that the Boston target received 18 of the 96 packages. The average number of links in the 18 chains was 5.9. But the now familiar expression 6 degrees of separation would not gain broad currency until many years later, when John Guare's play by that name premiered on Broadway in 1990. The concept became a meme in full when 4 Albright College students introduced 6 Degrees of Kevin Bacon in 1994, a game designed to measure the professional proximity of an actor, living or dead, to the American film star Kevin Bacon. An actor has a Bacon number of 1, for example, if he or she appeared in the same film with Bacon. Someone who appeared in a film with another actor who appeared in a film with Bacon has a Bacon number of 2, and so on. The average Bacon number is 2.95 among actors who have one. In that group, even the actor most distant from Bacon, William, has a Bacon number of only 7. Shafter, a Union Army officer during the Civil War, appeared in 2 films in 1898. For academics who study social connectedness, the 6 degrees concept gained little traction until 1998. That's when the sociologist Duncan Watts and the mathematician Steve Straga published their landmark paper, Collective Dynamics of Small World Networks in Nature. In the years since then, this paper has provided the mathematical foundation for the analytical tools that social scientists have been using with such remarkable success to study how ideas and behaviors spread through populations like infectious diseases. It has already been cited by other scholars more than 38,000 times and is one of the few papers ever published to be among the most widely cited works in multiple disciplines. In his 1976 book, The Selfish Gene, the evolutionary biologist Richard Dawkins coined the term meme, which Webster now defines as an idea, behavior, style, or usage that spreads from person to person within a culture. The meme is to cultural transmission, Dawkins argued, as the gene is to biological transmission. One of Charles Darwin's central insights was that natural selection favors genetic variations that enhance the individual organism's ability to survive and reproduce. Much of the time, the same variations also benefit larger groups, but often not. For example, an inclination to cheat when no one's looking might benefit individuals, but widespread cheating almost always makes matters worse for groups. It is the same with memes. The memes that propagate most successfully are often ones that benefit both individuals and groups. But here too, not always. As the legal scholar Jeffrey Stake has argued, ideas should not be treated as inert products, but as living things that sometimes exert some influence over their environment. Some of the ideas are more adept at surviving than others, and the ones that survive will not necessarily be good for humans. It is often hard to evaluate whether a specific behavior even qualifies as a meme, and if so, whether its consequences on balance are positive or negative. Yet sometimes the evidence is clear. We know, for example, that the strongest predictor of whether people will take up smoking is the proportion of their close friends who smoke. Smoking is thus clearly a meme. The negative health consequences of smoking are also conclusively documented, and most smokers themselves express regret over having started. By definition, then, smoking unambiguously qualifies as a socially destructive meme. On the other side of the ledger, we have compelling evidence that the adoption of photovoltaic solar panels is both socially contagious and almost uniformly positive in terms of environmental consequences. Accordingly, few would object to calling the practice a socially beneficial meme. Adam Smith, widely considered the father of economics, is often cited in defense of the claim that competitive markets produce the greatest good for the greatest number. The book is Under the Influence by Robert H. Frank.
From international trade policy to immigration policy to housing, we've got all kinds of topics. The wars between Republicans and Democrats, the Republican efforts to induce fascism in the United States. A great selection of opinions will be found over at HartmannReport.com. Fort Lauderdale, Florida, whacked with 25 inches of rainfall in less than 7 hours. Tornadoes are terrible. tearing up the South and the Midwest in ways that they haven't seen, frankly, ever before. I mean, there have always been tornadoes, but not like these. 200-mile-an-hour winds, these derecos that are a mile long. We have a serious crisis going on right now. There's also a major El Nino. It's off the coast of Peru right now. It's affecting the West Coast. So we're seeing wild swings from drought to floods to drought to floods in the West Coast. Climate change is here. Climate change is real, and climate change is a crisis. What do we know about it? What do we know about these things? How much worse is it going to get before it might get better? What can we do about it? We had a long conversation with Dr. Michael Mann, Distinguished Professor and Director of the Center for Science, Sustainability, and the Media at the University of Pennsylvania. There's a whole long rant about this over at hartmannreport.com. Check it out. 35 minutes past the hour. Welcome back. Two quick stories here, and then I'll pick up your calls. France. This just, breaking news out of France. Nicolas Sarkozy, the former president, he was president from 2007 to 2012. He just lost his case today against a 2021 conviction for corruption and influence peddling. He got a 3-year sentence with 2 years suspended. He has to wear an electronic bracelet. Again, this is the president of France, or the former president of France. They found that he and his former lawyer, a fellow by the name of Herzog, had formed a corruption pact with a judge by the name of Azibert to obtain and share information about a legal investigation they were concerned about. And get this, the way that they busted him, the French version of the FBI actually wiretapped the president while he was the president because they thought he was committing a crime. Where was our FBI when Donald Trump was in office? Sarkozy's going to jail for things that he did illegally. In fact, he had a third unofficial phone line that was taken out under the name of Paul Bismuth. And when the French FBI, or variation on the FBI, found out about it, they wiretapped it. Why does this guy have this secret phone line? He's also looking at another year in prison on a completely separate case that had to do with his getting money from Libya for that 2007 election campaign. So keep an eye on this, number one. But more importantly, hey, if France can do it, we can do it, right? Put a previous president in jail, no problem. And then, have him wear an ankle bracelet the rest of the time. Meanwhile, Ron DeSantis, I mentioned this in the first hour that I would tell you about this. This is just an absolutely breathtaking story that David Sirota's publication, levernews.com, broke. And the essence of the story is that Ron DeSantis is running a scheme where he takes pension funds. Now, these are firefighters, teachers, police officers, other government in Florida. Their money goes into a pension fund, and that pension fund is supposed to invest that money and put it in good investments. So, for example, over the last, if you were to have put money into the Standard & Poor's 500 index, right? Just buy an index fund. They don't even have significant fees. Back in 2019, if you had bought that, you would have made 15.7% interest, or profit, or whatever you want to call it. Your wealth would have grown by 15% between then and now, in the 4 years since then. But instead, DeSantis put it into a management fund called Aeolus Capital Management, and it has returned a 0.7% return. Now, of course, these hedge funds, they take a whole pile of money off the top in fees and commissions and things, which is where a lot of that money from the pension funds in Florida is going. It's going right into the pockets of the guys who own these funds. And in fact, this fund is in part owned by a guy by the name of Paul Singer, who also owns Elliott Management. He's the CEO, co-CEO of that. But this is, based in Bermuda. And Singer hosted a 2021 Colorado meeting of elite conservative billionaires called the American Opportunity Alliance, where DeSantis appeared. And the following year, Singer pumped $750,000 into the Republican Governors Association. 3 weeks after that, the Republican Governors Association transferred $2 million into Ron DeSantis' super PAC. And they go through 4 or 5 or 6 of these different hedge funds in New York that are producing crappy returns for the state of Florida, but DeSantis keeps giving them more and more of the retirees' money because they're recycling this money back to DeSantis. Now, it's illegal for them to give it directly to DeSantis, so what they're doing is they're giving it to the Republican Governors Association, and then a week later, the RGA writes a check to the DeSantis super PAC. It's another example of how DeSantis has corrupted Florida. It's another example of my original premise when I opened the show today, that these guys are just corrupt. Corruption is now officially the Republican Party's brand. It's what they live for. It's how they roll. It's what they do. All right, let's pick up your phone calls here. Dave in Claremore, Oklahoma. Hey, Dave, what's up?
Oh, yeah, I just want to get your take. We watch you every day, Tom, and we really value your opinions.
Thank you.
I want to get your take on Nazism. I don't understand. We fought a war against the Nazis. My father-in-law fought in World War II. They defeated the Nazis and the Japanese. The Japanese capitulated, whatever, and the Nazis disappeared, so to speak, and now they're back. And I don't understand. I do understand free speech, and at times it irritates me, but I don't understand how a Nazi isn't shot on sight. I just don't get it.
Well, first of all, we do have free speech in this country, so people can say whatever they want, no matter how reprehensible it is, as long as it doesn't, put another person directly into danger. But here's the thing, Dave. Just think about this for a minute. What is at the core of Nazism? Nazism is racism. The whole premise of Hitler's Nazism was that it was white supremacy, was that there's this master race. He called it the Aryan race, a word that he took from Madame Blavatsky in the Theosophical movement. And he said that, the white people are Aryans and they're the most evolved of the 5 races and all this stuff. I mean, they had this whole epistemology around it. And racism's very popular in the United States.
Yeah, I know. And I understand white supremacy. Totally against it. I just don't understand why a Nazi is given free speech.
Yeah.
Free speech is fine, but we killed those people. I mean,
well, we didn't kill the Nazis. We killed the Nazi military machine. I mean, that was a war. The rules of war are very different from the ruls of peace.
Yeah, I know, but
I get it that you're pissed off about it, but
the gun situation. These people are stockpiling guns,
right.
And how long is it going to be before there is a standoff?
Well, they keep trying to provoke one. That was what Tim McVeigh thought he was going to do. He thought he was going to provoke a war. I mean, they're all reading the Turner Diaries and Camp of the Saints, the two Bibles of the white supremacist movement. And in both those books, eventually, in Turner Diaries, the hero of the book blows up the federal building in Washington, D.C. I believe it was the FBI headquarters, as I recall. And as a result, the president starts confiscating guns all across America. And as a result of that, all the good white people with guns rise up and start a race war. And at the end of the book, they've killed all the what they describe as mud people, all the black in America, and it's just the good white guys standing on a pile of Bibles with their AR-15s in the air, and Camp of the Saints is not that much different. So I mean, this is the fantasy world that these guys live in, that they are somehow great patriots who are going to purge the country of all the less than fully human humans. It's a disgusting, vile, awful ideology. Germany tried to suppress it. They made it illegal. You can't, if you're in Germany and you walk down the street humming ding, dee, 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 the Horst Wessel song, you get arrested. In fact, if somebody's in Germany right now is watching me on YouTube, I probably just committed a crime. They took it very, very seriously, but it hasn't stopped the rise of Nazism in Germany.
I'm saying.
But the Nazis are back. They've got their own party now. It's called the Alternative for Deutschland, AfD party, And it's not fully Nazi, but it's about as close as you can get without being illegal. We can't kill racism or destroy racism simply by outlawing it. We have to. The most effective way to destroy it is through education and ridicule. Is to that guy on the bicycle who when the Patriot something or other, those guys in Washington, D.C. who are hiding their faces with the gaiters, which I guess they think is more fashionable than hoods, were marching through Washington, D.C., and this guy on a bicycle pulls up and starts yelling, your mother hates you, and you guys are losers. Go back to your mother's basement if she'll let you, and your pants don't even match. And, he was ridiculing them. And that's effective stuff, because these people really are fools. I mean, they're displaying their ignorance, just a basic ignorance about science, that we're all just human beings here, regardless of how much pigment our skin has. It has nothing to do with our brains. It has nothing to do with our minds. But, this is their thing, and we're not going to make it go away by outlawing it, and we're certainly not going to make it go away by shooting at them. So, I get what you're saying, Dave, but this is what we're stuck with. Dave, thank you so much for the call, and thanks for watching us on Free Speech TV. It's 45 minutes past the hour. We'll be back with more of the news of the day and your calls in just a moment.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Defending America from the weapons of mass deception. I'll be right back with your calls. And welcome back, Mark in San Jose. Hey, Mark, what's up?
Hi, Tom. I was going to agree with you on shooting female Dirkses.
On what?
Tom? Yeah.
Shooting female what?
Shooting female doctors. And Tom, you forgot to ask Congressman
I don't
Pocan
understand what you're talking about
the unique
here, Mark.
opportunity. Yeah, well, initially offered to both Mark and Roe, who are now needed to provide us with 30-day phones. When you were in your mid-60s, we had a chat with Anjeanette with these two. Good luck. And yes, it's here, an op-ed. So Rob Call, like Mark and Roe, know this opportunity. So before I read that scripted opportunity...
Okay, it's too weird for me, Mark. I'm sorry. Gail in Boise, Idaho. Hey, Gail, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, Tom?
Yeah.
Am I on?
Yes, you are.
I heard you say that Social Security was never a lockbox.
Mm-hmm.
And from my remember, I'm 86 years old, and I remember Johnson, because of the war on crime or war on poverty, he moved it into the general fund. I don't know.
He moved what into the general fund? Social Security, you said?
Social Security.
Oh no, it was always part of the general fund. It was never segregated. What happened was Reagan in 1983, the Greenspan Commission. This came out of the Greenspan Commission, Greenspan and Moynihan. They created a Social Security trust fund, which was a separate pile of money for accounting purposes, that was to be held and invested in treasuries. So it was, again, Social Security buying treasury bills. That fund is, about $2.5 trillion right now. And that fund was to build up until around the year 2000. And then from 2000 to 2040, that fund was going to get depleted as the boomers retired. That was just to pay for the boomers. And they paid for that fund. They created that surplus by increasing the Social Security tax by about a third, as I recall. So, the boomers basically got double taxed and paid for their own retirement, as opposed to the greatest generation, my father's generation, which, it was all pay as you go during that time.
Yeah. Well, like I say, my remembrance was that Johnson moved it for the war on poverty, but I could be wrong, I guess.
No, no offense, but the War on Poverty was a great program, and it had a lot of great programs. Medicare was part of it. Food stamps were part of it. Section 9 housing was part of it. There were a whole bunch of different pieces to the war on poverty. But I mean, maybe I'm wrong, Gail, excuse me, but I don't recall anything that had to do with Social Security having anything to do with the war on poverty.
Yeah.
But it is, I mean, the Social Security is at risk right now. And, you know, Kevin McCarthy is calling for thousands of employees of the Social Security Administration to be fired or laid off in order to make it harder for Social Security to do its job. Because, you know, Wall Street wants to compete with Social Security. They want people to put their money in IRAs and 401ks and things. So, Gail, I got to run, but thank you for the call. We'll be right back. It's 10 minutes before the hour. Stay tuned. I'll be back with you in 60 seconds. Help support Progressive Radio. If you're listening to us on a commercial station, call their advertisers and let them know you're listening. If you're listening to us on Pacifica, one of our many nonprofit stations, please support them when they do their fundraising drives. Thanks for supporting Progressive Talk Radio and tag you're it. 9 minutes before the hour, and Tim in Columbus, Ohio. Hey, Tim, thanks for listening to WGRN. What's up?
Hi, Tom. Thank you. Just to jump onto the comment about ridiculing the Nazis, neo-Nazis of today here in America, is one good way to ridicule them would be to inform them, give them a little bit of history. 500,000 Americans died in that war. And that it wasn't just somebody, you know, that they don't know. It was family, friends, neighbors.
Yeah, I thought it was 700,000, wasn't it? Died in World War II?
Oh.
I could be wrong.
World War II is 7. Wow, that's it's amazing, and I can't believe that that's even being tolerated.
Yeah.
But what I wanted to talk to you about, I called about, is that Social Security, to me, in my humble opinion, is really a pension, and it's a pension, the only pension that Americans really do have, unless they work for a private company.
Right, with a union, because private companies without unions tend not to have pensions.
Right, and that's dwindling too. So, except for the unions, but you know, we really need to message it that way, and you know, and that's why when they want to, weaken Social Security, we should talk about strengthening it.
I think I think that's a message, Tim, that would work for people who are over 50. People who remember when there was a time in America. I mean, you know, right up until really the Reagan years. Most Americans had a pension because you had 1/3 of America that was unionized, and therefore you had another third of America that had the equivalent of union wages and benefits because the unions set the local wage and benefit floor, and then you had a third of America that wasn't, you know, that was basically the low income and minimum wage America. And, you know, that 2/3 of Americans who had pensions has now collapsed down to about 10% of Americans. And, you know, the result of that is that now if you talk to young people, you talk to people who came of age after the 80s, they don't even know what the word pension means. I think we've got to come up with another word for it, Tim.
Yeah, well, it's Social Security. I mean, that's what we need to keep on the books because, you know, what was it, FDR that started Social Security?
Yeah.
Am I correct?
Yeah, 1935.
Yeah, right. You know,
the Wagner Act.
I remember reading.
Social Security Act.
Yeah, I remember reading that, you know, grandma would receive a $4 check and it'd save the whole family.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
True.
It was just like amazing how it helped people. You know, people were just dead broke, nothing.
Yeah,
you know,
the problem, people were dying in 1935. Old people were dying of heat in the South, of cold in the winter, and of hunger in some parts of the United States. And you're right, Social Security was the most effective anti-poverty program ever instituted in the history of the United States. It ended ended elderly poverty, or radically reduced it.
That's true, and I feel for the kids that are in the gig economies because they're not contributing to that. You know, so when it comes time when they turn 64, 65, and hopefully Social Security will still exist, is that they're going to have very little to live on. And that's all got to change the structure. Like, why would someone that's making minimum wage wouldn't have a higher, would be so low in the payment of Social Security? That should be equalized to just cost of living. Because, someone that right now that didn't participate very much or that because of low wages is, they're getting $800 a month. Well, you can't make it on $800 a month. That means you're working till you're 90, Yeah,
I agree. For better or for worse, I mean, the way that they put Social Security together, the more you earn during your lifetime, the more you make from Social Security. So I'm making good money from Social Security. I could literally live on it. My mother-in-law, not so much. I mean, she's making very little, and I think that's wrong. I think that low-wage people actually need a huge raise from Social Security, and maybe high-wage people should not be getting quite as much because they are in a position to squirrel a little money aside. So there's some weirdnesses here that I think we need to address. Tim, I need to move along, but thank you. Great topic. Thank you. Silvio in Massapequa, New York. Hey, Silvio, what's on your mind today?
How you doing, Tom? Anyway, I made up a letter after the House Republicans voted that monstrosity of a default bill.
Yeah.
And I addressed it with my favorite congressman's name and phone number, Andrew Garbarino, at the top. And I've been passing around so many each day around my neighborhood. I'm hoping he gets phone calls that he doesn't like from that.
Is he a Republican?
Oh, absolutely. You know that.
I thought I recognized the name, but I'm not.
You should know the name by now.
Yeah.
Anyway, when I was handing it out, I spoke to a few of my neighbors, and I discovered a word that evidently scared the daylights out of them. It scared the daylights out of the Democrats. It scares the daylights out of everybody. And the word is called cancer. Because in that letter, I wrote the fact that my 4-year-old grandson has been getting chemotherapy for 2 years to treat a pediatric form of cancer called LCH. Mm-hmm. And I'm not going to go into the name. It's a long name anyway.
Yeah, we only have 20 seconds anyway. So
anyway, what happened was, I said the Republicans are cutting all the research for cancer that the government provides, the NIH and their labs. And then I'm thinking, Waller, that other congressman up in Rockland County, he was the one that flipped the Democratic district.
Mm-hmm.
In the middle of his district is a camp for children with cancer, their parents and their siblings.
Uh-huh.
And he's basically going to cut the legs out from underneath them. And I wish somebody, Jeffries or somebody, would just go on TV and say, look, this is what he's going to do.
They're going after kids with cancer. It's in Kevin McCarthy's budget. Amazing. Silvio, thank you. Thank you for that.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free and you can sign up at ThomHartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the HartmannReport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at ThomHartmann.com. So check them all out at ThomHartmann.com and HartmannReport.com.
We say fight back!
book for the Thom Hartmann Book Club today is A Nation Forged by Crisis, A New American History by Jay Sexton. And I'm reading from the introduction. This is page 9. The quest for national security and global power, America's shifting position in the international economy, and fluctuations in immigration have made the United States the nation that it is today. Americans' foreign relations have been conditioned its history not only in their cumulative effects over the long haul, but also as a result of their volatility. In periods of crisis, America's position in the world has lurched in unexpected directions. For as inexorable as the rise of the United States appears in retrospect, there have been contingent moments in which the very existence of our nation was up for grabs. This is the essence of crisis. The world turned upside down, the known replaced by the unknown, panic reigning as people struggle to maintain their balance and shifts in the very ground beneath their feet. It came with a speed and ferocity that left men dazed, New York Times correspondent Elliot Bell wrote of Wall Street's catastrophic collapse in October of 1929. Quote, the market seemed like an insensate thing that was wreaking a wild and pitiless revenge upon those who thought to master it, end quote. Crises are contagious, spreading like viruses from one realm to another. It's not without reason that the word crisis was associated with medical conditions and health scares in the 19th century. Each of the periods under consideration in this book were less a singular crisis than a set of interlinked crises. A political crisis could trigger an economic panic, which in turn could intensify social conflict, and so on. As these pandemics spread through the body politic, crisis itself was normalized, becoming an almost accepted characteristic of an age. Just as foreign crises have spread to the United States, domestic ones have spilled across its borders, unsettling and peoples, as well as reconfiguring America's connections to the world. Consider the fateful winter of secession that followed the 1860 election of Abraham Lincoln. The crisis over slavery that divided the Union into warring sections that led to a series of sharp reversals in America's position in the global system. The foreign capital that had rushed into the roaring American economy in the preceding decades suddenly began to flee. Indeed, more capital left the United States in 1860 to 1862 than came into it. Also a once-in-a-century occurrence. One of the world's most valuable commodities and America's largest exports, Southern cotton, was confined to the ports of the Confederacy as a result of Richmond's ill-fated diplomatic strategy, leading to unemployment and social unrest in the British textile town of Lancashire. The most unexpected reversal was how the national security that the United States had attained after the war against Mexico in the 1840s was suddenly imperiled, with European powers encroaching once again upon the Western Hemisphere. Meanwhile, the Confederate emissaries across the Atlantic were in search of alliance with Britain. Our country, Secretary of State William Seward lamented in early 1861, after having expelled all European powers from the continent, now threatened to relapse into an aggravated form of its colonial experience, and like India, Turkey, China, and Italy, become the theater of transatlantic intervention and rapacity. A wider view of American history that looks beyond the nation's borders brings into focus not only the migration patterns, economic flows, and international rivalries that have connected the United States to the world, but also those rare moments in which the very existence of the nation was in question. Perhaps none was more pregnant with implications than the autumn of 1877, when the fate of the Patriots' bid for independence hung in the balance. Having proclaimed their independence to the world the previous 4th of July, their cause had stalled on the battlefield and in the diplomatic courts of the old world. I think the game is pretty near up, Washington privately confessed at year's end. To accomplish their independence is not quite so easy as to declare it, the British philosopher Jeremy Bentham haughtily remarked. But then a series of events forever changed the course of modern history. The stunning Patriot victory at the Battle of Saratoga in October, the drafting of the Articles of Confederation in November that, for all its limitations, further demonstrated the political resolve of the Americans. And most of all, the alliance signed with France in February 1778, which provided the Patriots with the resources, military assistance, and naval power that ultimately tipped the scales in their favor. There are comparable Saratoga moments in other crises in U.S. history, as we shall see. These contingent moments played out in their own distinctive ways, but are joined by a common denominator that has been curiously forgotten in our age of U.S. global power. Foreign states and people have played decisive roles in the critical moments of American history. As we make our way through our own era of global instability, In an unprecedentedly interconnected world, there's perhaps no more important lesson from the past to keep in mind. Crisis may beget crisis, Franklin Roosevelt said as his administration transitioned from battling the Great Depression to entering the Second World War. But the progress underneath does not wholly halt. It does go forward, end quote. Like so many of Roosevelt's public statements, this one reveals a truth even as it conceals others. The United States came out on the other side of its greatest crises as a stronger and more efficiently organized nation, as Roosevelt suggested. The process of mobilizing resources to counter threats catalyzed innovations in political economy, such as the creation of a national financial system during the Civil War, and the economic. The book is A Nation Forged by Crisis by Jay Sexton.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
In the third hour of our program, if you're trying to watch us on Sling, I know the Free Speech TV is breaking up on Sling badly. Just check out tom.tv, thom.tv, and all the other sources as well, all the other places you can catch the show. Some interesting news about ugly houses. You ever seen these ads? You know, we will buy your house for cash, that kind of thing. Well, Anjeanette Damon is on the line with us, a reporter with ProPublica who focuses on government accountability, and ProPublica.org is the website. And Anjeanette Damon, ANJEANETTEDAMON on Twitter, by the way, or at ProPublica, has just done a great report on this, the ugly truth behind We Buy Ugly Houses. Anjeanette, first of all, I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly.
Yes, you are.
Okay, great. Thank you. Welcome to the program. So, ugly houses, tell us about this.
Yeah, so it was the same thing. I had that curiosity, seeing those signs everywhere, the billboards, you get the letters in the mail and the postcards, you see them on social media and online ads. And I thought, well, who are these people? How do they do this? Like, they're going to offer me cash for my home and I can sell it real quick. So I, with my team of co-reporters at ProPublica, Byron Duncan and Molly Simon, we started digging into this about a year ago. Put a call out asking for people who have done business with these companies. And we quickly began to focus on a corporation called Homevestors of America, which bills itself as the largest cash buying homes for cash company in the country. And what they are is they're a franchise company. So think of like McDonald's. Individual business owners buy a franchise and then use that branding. And that's what Homevestors is. They spend an awful lot of money on the We Buy Ugly Houses brand, and individual house flippers essentially set up an LLC, an individual business, and they buy a franchise. And that gives them access to the training materials of Homevestors. They learn how to do this house flipping thing, and they're plugged into this massive advertising apparatus that they really rely on to generate leads.
So what's, I get it. On the one hand, you've got some people who are in distress. They need to sell their home quickly. They've lost their job, whatever, and they want to get the best deal they can. And on the other hand, you've got people who are interested, who have a little extra money and who are interested in investing in real estate. What's wrong with that?
Yeah, I mean, that system works well in a lot of cases. Most house flippers are pretty upfront, including those with Homevestors. They say, we are a discount home buyer. You're going to be trading top dollar or top price for your house for convenience and speed. And so for a lot of people, that works pretty well. We found in our investigation that the type of homeowner who is targeted by the advertising, Homevestors advertising, are often vulnerable people, or they're in desperate situations. So Homevestors will say that we target houses with our advertising. They look for houses that are older, kind of in that mid-price range, and they don't target individual people or life circumstances. However, those, as I said a minute ago, those homes are often owned by people in desperate situations. And beyond just targeting houses, they also teach their franchise owners how to build relationships with others who are often in contact with people in vulnerable situations. So nursing home administrators or probate lawyers or divorce lawyers, trying to find what home investors will call people in ugly situations. Then they go and they teach their franchise owners how to find the pain of the homeowner, to kind of leverage that difficult situation that the person's in into selling their house. Again, going into this eyes wide open. It works well for some, but there's this huge information imbalance or disparity of information where the company, they're experts in real estate, and they target homeowners who, one, if they've owned their house for a long time, they're maybe not paying attention to the market. They really don't have a very clear idea of what the value is. And the house flippers are able to kind of focus that individual's attention on the dollar amount or the money that they might need to get out of their situation, and not necessarily how much their house is worth.
Yeah, you tell the story, for example, of Corinne Casanova, who bought a home in Baldwin Park, in 1961, owned it outright. You want to share that story with us?
Yeah, so she's really an example of the type of homeowner who can kind of fall victim to some of these practices. She and her husband had bought this house in the 60s. They raised their family there. She was within days of moving into an assisted living center. Her health was failing, and she had been experiencing dementia for quite some time. And within days of having to move, she, unbeknownst to her family who was taking care of her, decided to call the phone number on a letter that she had received from Homevestors. She called the number, said, I need to get an idea of how much my house is worth. Can you provide me an estimate? They sent a salesman from Patriot Holdings. Again, these are individual LLCs or franchise owners that do work under the Homevestors brand. So Patriot Holdings went to her house, and within a very short time, couple hours or less, they had obtained a contract from her that she signed to sell her house for about 60% of what it was worth.
Whoa.
Yeah. And that
that's a completely different business model from buying a house that's ugly, it's in distress, that needs a new roof, that has the porch falling off, putting some money into the house, upgrading it, putting a new kitchen in or something like that, and then selling it at the market. I mean, this is how home flippers typically work, right? What I just described, not what you just described, but is what you described, basically taking advantage of people who don't understand the value of their house. Is that essential to their business model?
We found a wide pattern across the country of Homevestors franchises doing very similar activities. Corinne sadly died within 19 days of signing that contract. And when her family found out that she had signed the contract, essentially selling the house, they called up Homevestors and said, look, my mom had dementia, could not understand what you were asking her to do. We need to get out of this contract. And instead of saying, oh, all right, yeah, sorry about that, and walking away, collecting the deposit and walking away, Patriot Holdings sued that family for breach of contract and wrangled them into it. And we found a pattern of this, again, across the country of Homevestors franchises who would either sue someone who had second guessed getting into this deal, or sometimes they would even more often, they would cloud the title of the home. So again, if the person second guessed the decision and wanted to sell it to somebody else, they couldn't without paying off the Homevestors franchise to walk away.
Wow. So I guess there's this raises 2 points. The first is, if you're a homeowner and you get approached by one of these companies, beware. Go in with eyes wide open at the very least. But secondly, shouldn't there be some regulation of this?
Yeah, I mean, there are So one thing to understand is that house flipping is largely unregulated. When you think about calling up, say, a real estate agent to represent you in the home buying or the home selling process, that individual by law and regulation has a fiduciary duty to you to best represent your interests and try and get you the best deal possible. Now, that's not to say that real estate agents are immune from unethical behavior, but if you do feel like you've been treated unfairly by one, there's a licensing board that you can go and complain to and say, you know, I think I was mistreated by this professional. In the house flipping industry, there's very few regulations. And this is kind of a state by state, sometimes city by city jurisdictional question. And so there's this patchwork of regulations. There are some states that have tried to enact some regulations. Philadelphia is an example of a city who has tried to go after this practice in order to provide some more consumer protections for people that do want to do business with house flippers. But again, I think there's kind of a lack of transparency around how these businesses operate. It, again, took us a year to do this investigation. There are few public records. Again, some of the, you talked about the house flipper that buys a house, fixes it up, and then sells it. Oftentimes, these flippers don't even take ownership of the house. They don't do any repairs. They simply get someone to sign a contract, then they sell that contract to another investor and take a, you know, $10,000, $20,000, $30,000 cut of whatever that equity would be. So, you know, you have some jurisdictions that are looking at that. Well, should that be a taxable transaction right there? Are we missing out on some of these real estate transfer taxes? So there are different ways that localities are trying to enact some rules around the practice.
It seems like there should be some kind of national standards. Is there anybody talking about this in Congress?
I haven't seen any talk in Congress about this. You know, there are some pending bills in Congress that address more of that institutional investor buying practice.
Yeah, the hedge funds are huge in this right now, too.
Yeah. Well, they, you know, and they come in and they buy up huge swaths of neighborhoods, and then suddenly they're the largest landowner or property owner in a neighborhood.
And they turn them into rental properties.
Right. And that's a different kind of issue. But, it's possible that, Congress could start taking a look at this. But really, real estate has been the realm of local ordinances and state laws rather than federal practices other than the Fair Housing Act.
It's an amazing story. You can read it over at ProPublica.org. Anjeanette Damon is one of the writers for this, or I guess the lead reporter with ProPublica, focusing on government accountability. Anjeanette, thanks so much for dropping by today. Great talking to you.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.
Nice meeting you. Thank you. We'll be back here on the program in just a moment. Are you arguing with bots on Twitter?
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Almost half of all the internet activity is actually automated. Stay tuned. And welcome back. AJ in La Mesa, California. Hey, AJ, what's on your mind today?
Tom, how are you today?
I am great, but I'll get better. How about you?
Outstanding. Thank you. I'm well as well. Have you ever seen a series that was done by the BBC back in '73, brought to the U.S. by WGBH in Boston, called The Ascent of Man?
Yes,
Jacob.
I remember it well.
Well, that series changed my life, and in particular, episode 11, Knowledge or Certainty, which is probably the most powerful thing I've ever seen on television, and it's as relevant today as it was 50 years ago.
Wow.
And
Tell me about it.
The opening line out of Bernofsky's mouth is, one aim of the physical sciences has been to give an exact picture of the material world. One achievement of physics in the 20th century has been to prove that that aim is unattainable. He goes on and says, there is no absolute knowledge, and those who claim it, whether they are scientists or dogmatists, open the door to tragedy. All knowledge, all information is imperfect. We have to treat it with humility. And then he says, there are two parts to the human dilemma. One is the belief that the end justifies the means. The other is the betrayal of the human spirit that turns a nation a civilization into a regiment of ghosts, obedient ghosts or tortured ghosts. And he ends his speaking with, in the end, the words were said by Oliver Cromwell, I beseech you, in the bowels of Christ, think it possible you may be mistaken. Now, the episode is bracketed with an incredibly powerful dramatic conceit, which I won't reveal, and the last bit of film with Bronofsky in it at the end of the central portion of the episode is something that was not scripted. He did it extemporaneously and in the moment, and it's incredible. When I saw that, I saw it originally in high school, and then in college I took a course that used that series as its basis. And when episode 11 was shown, at the end of it, the class was absolutely silent. Some people were sobbing. The instructor gave several minutes.
I have no recollection of any of the details of any of those shows. I just remember being very impressed by them and by the presenter. Bronofsky, you said is his name?
Jacob Bronofsky, Bronowski. He was a mathematician, ended up his life at the Salk Institute for Biological Studies in La Jolla, where he did the series and died not long after it wrapped. Now, this episode is available in the latest DVD incarnation, version 2, at Internet Archive, so you can watch it for free. And it's posted twice. There's one copy that's the inferior copy, probably from videotape, but there's one that's archive.org/v-of--man-EP11.
Okay, episode
and
11.
It's an excellent transfer. The audio's been improved.
I'm surprised it's not on YouTube.
Copyright infringement. Yeah, they keep taking it down from copyright.
I get it. I totally get it. Well, AJ, thanks for that. Thanks for the interesting referral. That'll be a real flashback to track that down. It's 21 minutes past the hour. We'll be back. Stay tuned. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. So Kevin McCarthy and the Republicans have been pushing legislation and ideas that would basically crash the economy. And a lot of people are kind of scratching their heads going, why would Republicans, who basically are owned by billionaires and big corporations, why would they want to crash the economy? Doesn't that hurt billionaires and big corporations? In fact, no, it doesn't. Billionaires and big corporations actually get richer and more profitable during economic crashes. The largest fortunes in America were made during the Great Depression, or some of them. Joe Kennedy, J. Paul Getty, they made a fortune because it was a buying opportunity. Everything was cheap because everything had crashed, so they were buying up stock and buying houses. They had cash. And they have more negotiating power with unions, with workers, with their vendors. There's all kinds of benefits to billionaires and big corporations of having a crash. So don't think the Republicans won't do it. There's a whole article about it over at HartmannReport.com. Check it out. "23 minutes past the hour." So have you found yourself having, battles with people on Twitter or on Facebook? I have, on multiple occasions, and I'm constantly having, particularly on Twitter, getting what I'm pretty sure are bots. I mean, people will respond to things that I say, and the way that the thing is phrased tells me that either it's not a native English speaker, in which case it's just a troll from probably Russia, or Saudi Arabia, or who knows, or it's a machine. And, I'd been suspecting that there were a lot of bots, and I just block them, and generally, sometimes I mute them, just ignore them. But what's interesting is that they apparently are bots. Remember when Musk was buying Twitter, and he said, I want to know what percentage of your participants, what percentage of your users are bots. And there was this big fight over whether they would reveal that information, and ultimately they did, but only to him, and then he never told us what it was. Well, this group, Imperva, which is an online company that sniffs out bots, what they have found is that 47.4% of all internet traffic is coming from bots rather than humans. And the thing that I noticed is that when like I said, I ban them or I block them, and every now and then, literally 2 or 3 times a year, it's that rare, I'll get an email or a note somehow from somebody saying, hey, you just blocked me, and I'm not a bot, and I'm not a crazy, and I wasn't, I think you mistook me, and then I go in and I unblock them, right? I mean, it happens rarely, but it happens. I've never had anybody that I suspected of being a bot come back to me and say, well, I'm not a bot. Why'd you do that? Also, they warned that bad bots make up 66.6% of all internet traffic. And the concern is that with artificial intelligence growing and evolving essentially by leaps and bounds, that we're going to see a whole awful lot more of this, and we're all going to be basically debating with computers as we go into the future. All right, that's an interesting story. Here's our crazy alert for the day, or something like it. Jesse Waters over on Fox News. He says, black Americans shouldn't be worried about, gun violence. They shouldn't be worried about white supremacists. They shouldn't be worried about people who want to kill them, who come into their churches and just shoot them dead. What they should be worried about is absent fathers. Right. The percentage of absent fathers is, there's not a huge racial divide here, particularly since no-fault divorce laws went into effect. But, this old canard. Oh, absent fathers and education issues, he said. This old canard that, black people are more likely to be terrible parents or dumb and can't do educate. All of these horrible things that are complete misunderstandings, intentional, I believe, misunderstandings of the impact of poverty on people's lives this is just so racist. So Jesse Waters, fulminating white supremacist? Who would have thought? We'll be back.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
We'll be right back with your calls on the other side of this break. Fanon, and it's the wretched of the earth. This is from the chapter on national culture on page 145. It sort of reads like Thomas Paine, actually. Each generation must discover its mission, fulfill it, or betray it in relative opacity. In the underdeveloped countries, preceding generations have simultaneously resisted the insidious agenda of colonialism and paved the way for the emergence of the current struggles. Now that we are in the heat of combat, we must shed the habit of decrying the efforts of our forefathers or feigning incomprehension at their silence or passiveness. They fought as best they could with the weapons they possessed at the time, and if their struggle did not reverberate throughout the international arena, the reason should be attributed not so much to a lack of heroism, but to a fundamentally different international situation. More than one colonized subject had to say, "We've had enough." More than one tribe had to rebel. More than one peasant revolt had to be quelled. More than one demonstration had to be repressed for us to stand firm, certain of our victory. For those of us who are determined to break the back of colonialism, our historic mission is to authorize every revolt, every desperate act, and every attack aborted or drowned in blood. In this chapter, we'll analyze the fundamental issue of the legitimate claim to a nation. The political party that mobilizes the people, however, is little concerned with this issue of legitimacy. Political parties are concerned solely with daily reality, and it is in the name of this reality, in the name of this immediacy which influences the present and future of men and women, that they make their call to action.
The political party may very well speak of the nation in emotional terms, but it is primarily interested in getting the people who are listening to understand that they must join in the struggle if they quite simply want to exist. We now know that in the first phase of the national struggle, colonialism attempts to diffuse nationalist demands by manipulating economic doctrine. At the first sign of a dispute, colonialism feigns comprehension by acknowledging with ostentatious humility that the territory is suffering from serious underdevelopment that requires major social and economic reforms. And it is true that certain spectacular measures, such as the opening of work sites for the unemployed here and there, delay the formation of a national consciousness by a few years. But sooner or later, colonialism realizes it is incapable of achieving a program of socioeconomic reforms that would satisfy the aspirations of the colonized masses. Even when it comes to filling their bellies, colonialism proves to be inherently powerless. The colonial state very quickly discovers that any attempt to disarm the national parties at a purely economic level would be tantamount to practicing in the colonies what it did not want to do in its own territory. And it is no coincidence that today the doctrine of Cartierism is on the rise just about everywhere. Cartier's bitter disillusionment with France's stubborn determination to retain ties with people it will have to feed, whereas so many French citizens are in dire straits, reflects colonialism's inability to transform itself into a nonpartisan aid program. Hence, once again, no need to waste time repeating, better to go hungry with dignity than to eat one's fill in slavery. On the contrary, we must persuade ourselves that colonialism is incapable of procuring for colonized people the material conditions likely to make them forget their quest for dignity. Once colonialism is understood where its social reform tactics would lead it, back come the old reflexes of adding police reinforcements, dispatching troops, and establishing a regime of terror better suited to its interests and its psychology. Within the political parties, or rather parallel to them, we find the cultured class of colonized intellectuals. The recognition of a national culture and its right to exist represent their favorite stomping ground. Whereas the politicians integrate their action in the present, the intellectuals place themselves in the context of history. Faced with the colonized intellectuals' debunking of the colonist theory of a pre-colonial barbarism, colonialism's response is mute. It is especially mute since the ideas put forward by the young colonized intelligentsia are widely accepted by metropolitan specialists. It is in fact now commonly recognized that for several decades, numerous European researchers have widely rehabilitated African, Mexican, and Peruvian civilizations. Some have been surprised by the passion invested by the colonized intellectuals in their defense of a national culture. But those who consider this passion exaggerated are strangely apt to forget that their psyches and their egos are conveniently safeguarded by the French or German culture, whose worth has been proven and which has gone unchallenged. I concede the fact that the actual existence of an civilization has done little to change the diet of today's Mexican peasant. I concede that whatever proof there is of the once mighty Songhai civilization does not change the fact that the Songhais today are undernourished, illiterate, abandoned to the skies and water, with a blank mind and glazed eyes. But as we have said on several occasions, this passionate quest for a national culture prior to the colonial era can be justified by the colonized intellectuals' shared interest in stepping back and taking a hard look at the Western culture in which they risk becoming ensnared. Fully aware that they're in the process of losing themselves and consequently of being lost to their people, these men work away with raging heart and furious mind to renew contact with their people's oldest inner essence, the furthest removed from colonial times. Let us delve deeper. Perhaps this passion and this rage are nurtured, or at least guided, by the secret hope of discovering beyond the pleasant wretchedness, beyond the self-hatred, something that redeems us.
Did you know that every weekday we send out an email before the show giving you all the topics coming up so you can be fully informed and ready to interact with our program? Or that after the show we send out Sue's Stack, a list of every topic I've discussed along with clickable hot links to every source of information I've shared with you on the air? It's all completely free and available over at thom.tv, THOM.tv. Check it out. Welcome back. By the way, just a couple of, well, actually just one quick story here. Donna Deegan upset Republican business leader Daniel Davis to become the first woman ever and the second Democrat in 3 decades, in 30 years, to be elected as Jacksonville's mayor. Something is happening in Florida. I think that, in fact, she ran against a Republican who had raised $8 million. She only raised $2 million, and she still beat him. So there's something going on. I think America's waking up. Obviously, you know, the Dobbs decision, the end of Roe v. Wade, was a huge kick upside the head. But I think more generally, Americans are figuring out the scam that is the GOP. It's just a giant grift. It's all about money and power, period, full stop. All right, let's pick up your phone calls here. John in Seattle. Hey, John, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, good morning, Tom. Yeah, it's a rough day in North Carolina.
How so?
I wanted to bring up something that, seeing how people are so ignorant with voting and dealing with the political climate. I can remember taking classes in high school for driver's ed, and it was fairly new. And it was during I graduated in 70, so it was like 68 years ago. But I was thinking it would be great to have the Board of Education pass a bill in the House and the Senate that it should be mandatory taking a class called Voters' Rights, and that it should be taught in public schools and be made mandatory, or private schools, but be made mandatory for a class for like 2 semesters. And the
we used
age
to have that. It was called civics,
17. Huh?
We used to have that, and it was, you know, available all across the country. It was called civics, and then, you know, Reagan's Secretary of Education came along, Bill Bennett, the author of the Little Book of Virtues, and said, you know, we don't need no stinking civics education. In fact, let me just share with you a quick clip, if I can find it here, from him. Here it is, right here. This is Bill Bennett speaking to how to deal with crime in America. Keep in mind, this was the guy that Ronald Reagan put in charge of educational policy in the United States.
But I do know that it's true that if you wanted to reduce crime, you could, if that were your sole purpose, you could abort every black baby in this country and your crime rate would go down. That would be an impossible, ridiculous, and morally reprehensible thing to do, but your crime rate would go down.
That is the Reagan administration. Back to you, John.
I think calling it civics, it sounds a little bit off the norm of what I think the kids today in high school are starting to get the picture of being political. And it would be good to do something as far as education goes, teaching a class on voting, you know, and how to vote and why we vote.
Yeah.
But, you know, they need to bring that back.
I agree. And I remember civics class. In fact, I remember civics class in 3rd, 4th, 5th grade. I mean, you know, I had civics for years.
That's too young.
Yeah. Well, it was a good foundation. I mean, you know, I think I was probably in 4th or 5th grade when I learned. I had to memorize the preamble to the Constitution and the Gettysburg Address, and I can still recite parts of both of them from memory. You know, and then that was the stepping off point for a conversation about what did it mean, and then that continued through junior high school and high school. But that was in the 50s and 60s. You know, post 1980s, civics pretty much went away in America. And
but now when people are starting to register voting, and they're making a big deal out of it, and it's becoming you know, divided, so divided to the point where, you know, people don't understand what gerrymandering means.
Right.
They have no clue. So a lot of things right at junior high school is a good time to teach those kinds of ethics, or, you know, the moral boundaries of education. Like, you know, they teach math, geometry, and history and all that, but voters' rights class would be excellent.
to be mandatory.
I'm with you.
Like
I'm with you, John. We're getting redundant here, so yeah, I'm going to move along. But yes, absolutely, I completely agree. CJ in Madison, Wisconsin. Hey, CJ, what's on your mind today?
Well, thank you for taking my call, Tom. We've talked a number of times. I am a Republican conservative, and the mere fact, talking about two topics, Social Security. Do you have any grandchildren?
I do. Two of them.
Are you aware that they owe $94,000 already?
No, they don't.
Each yeah, they do.
That's nonsense,
that's
John. And I'm also aware of the fact that each one of my grandchildren right now, if they were to become disabled, if either one of them were to be, God forbid, crippled for the rest of their lives somehow, they will be provided for by Social Security. Social Security is not just for old people to retire. And, Social Security is doing just fine, thank you very much. Are you talking about the national debt? Is that the number that you're taking the national debt and dividing it by the population? Was that the number you're trying to throw at me?
Very good.
Okay, so let me ask you, CJ, are you aware of the fact that 100% of that national debt can be accounted for by four things? Reagan's tax cuts, Bush's tax cuts, Trump's tax cuts, and the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. If you took those four things combined, you have over $40 trillion. And our debt, our national debt, is only a little over $30 trillion. So, yeah, I'm very aware of the national debt.
You are aware, then, that the $94,000 your grandchild owes. So you are.
No, my grandchild does not owe that. The federal government owes that to bondholders. Let's be honest here, John. CJ, let's try some honesty. The federal government owes that.
Yeah, that is our national debt. But
they are going to collect that money from corporate income taxes. They're going to collect that money from personal income taxes. They're going to collect that money from a whole bunch of fees. I mean, the federal government has literally thousands of income streams. To say that the entire national debt is going to have to be paid off by individual American citizens is simply a lie. And I don't appreciate it when people try to lie on my program.
Well, kind of like when you talk about Jesse Waters, because Jesse Waters agrees with Denzel Washington. He agrees with Morgan Freeman. The statistic about fathers being in the homes. Are you aware that in the 70s?
CJ, nice try, CJ. I'll give you one topic. You had your topic. It was the national debt. I'm not going to get into a debate with you about absent fathers. It's Gilbert in San Antonio, Texas. Hey, Gilbert, what's on your mind today?
Fine. Thank you for taking my call. I was listening to your show, and there's several things I'd like to respond to, but I did call about how I feel about what's happening with illegal immigration. I'm an African-American here in San Antonio, Texas, and I guess you would call me a conservative Democrat. I guess that's what you would refer to me as. I feel that the nation is really in jeopardy because we're just too lenient with illegal immigration. I think that if a person comes here I think they should be made to go to school for 13 years. And the reason why I feel like that is because our children who are born here are not actually citizens until after they've attended school for 12 years. So
well, that's not true. Your child is a citizen the moment they're born.
Well, they're not an active citizen, let's put it that way. They don't get a chance to portray or act as a purposeful individual until after they're out of the wick of their parents. They can't sign contracts. They can't negotiate. Well, those are not functions of citizenship. Those are functions of adulthood.
But the point that you're making, Gilbert, and I suspect you and I are probably going to agree more than we're going to disagree. It seems to me that the point, and correct me if I'm wrong, that you're making is that no country can sustain unlimited immigration for any kind of long period of time and maintain a functioning economy and culture. That when you have
that's true. That's true. I agree with that. But I'm looking more specifically at what we're individually doing. I heard you talk about education a while ago. I think that the purpose of education should be defined, and I think when we bring adults from another country here as immigrants, they still have ties to where they come from, and it's hard for them to really let go of where they came from and become true Americans.
Well, it depends on the individual, Gilbert.
Well, now that could be true too, but I guess because living here in San Antonio, I'm confronted with a whole lot more atrocities than maybe you are. Where are you, in Oregon?
Yeah.
Yeah, see, well, I'm down here on the border, and it's tough down here. You know, if you're an American citizen, it's like you don't exist. You know, nobody listens to you. All the other states think you're like the other folks that come here. And it's really different, you know, and I was born here in San Antonio.
So what do you know, number one, we've tried to deal with this for a whole bunch of, in a bunch of different ways since 1986 when Ronald Reagan signed the last serious and comprehensive Immigration Reform Act. We have built a wall across most of the southern border, which has radically cut back on illegal immigration, what you referred to as illegal immigration. Although it's still happening, and it's still happening to the tune of, probably 500,000 to 1 million people a year. And, we during the Trump administration, we went from the goal of 100,000 people a year coming into this country legally, and being processed for green cards and things like that, down to 15,000. That clearly was, fewer than appropriate. But you still have the problem of people who are in this country illegally. The majority of them actually not coming across the southern border. The majority of them coming in on airplanes and driving in cars as tourists and simply staying here. We have literally millions of cars that cross the southern border every single day, from California all the way across to Texas. And a lot of those people just come across as tourists and stay here. So what I've been saying for years is if we want to deal with this honestly, that what we have to stop is the magnet, as it were. First of all, we need, a reasonable immigration policy. We need to figure out, how many more people do we need, or how many more people are appropriate to have in the United States. And we need to center that basically on what's the best interest of the United States and the citizens of the United States. I realize Guatemala is in a crisis right now from climate change. Honduras and El Salvador are in a crisis right now as a result of Reagan messing with them back in the 80s. They still haven't recovered from that. To some extent, that's true also of Honduras. But the big driver is people coming here looking for work, coming here looking for a better life. And I can tell you, I lived in a foreign country for a year. I was a migrant, and it was Germany. And I've worked in another one, Australia. And in both cases, I had to get a work permit. And if I had been caught in Germany or in Australia working, as I did, and drawing a paycheck, and had not had a work permit, my employer could have gone to jail. And I just don't understand why Republicans fight this. We've had Democrats propose this over and over and over again for the better part of 20 years now, that we should change our immigration laws to say that, because right now what we do is we punish the individuals. Somebody comes across the border, desperate, looking for a new life, brings their family or not. They come here and they're looking for work, and we catch them, we throw them in jail, we deport them, we punish them, we imprison them. Why are we not punishing and imprisoning the employers? Why not turn off the magnet, right? I mean, it just seems that simple. And then figure out, an appropriate way to deal with people as human beings. Gilbert, I'm sorry, I'm out of time. I got to run, but I get the problem. I don't believe it's a crisis, but I get the problem. We'll be back. It's 46 minutes past the hour.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
48 minutes past the hour. Back with more of your calls in just a moment. And welcome back. Sue in Sonora, California. Hey, Sue, thanks for watching Free Speech. What's on your mind today?
Hi, it's been a long time. Well, earlier you were talking about the benefit payouts from Social Security, and I don't want to get all wonky about the formula and everything, but I did want to let you know that the formula for the payouts and the percentage of what people have paid in that they get out in their benefit is bottom loaded. in that the lowest wage earners actually get, a replacement rate of more like close to 80%, whereas the top wage earners, like yourself, what you are receiving represents more like in maybe 56%.
Well, that's interesting, but there's still. I mean, I'll give you real numbers. I mean, I'm making, and this is after the Medicare has been deducted, so I'm actually making more than these numbers. But I'm making $3,800 a month. Louise is making $900 a month from Social Security, and her mother is who's 92, I think, or 93. And sharp as a tack and just a wonderful person. I think she's making a little over $800 a month. I mean, somehow that just seems wrong to me. That Louise and I should be making $4,000 a month from Social Security, and her mother, who is who doesn't have the kind of income I have, is barely. I mean, how can you get by on $800 a month?
Well, I know. Well, I don't want to get real wonky, like I said about this, because when it's figured to begin with, all the earnings that you've earned over the years are adjusted for inflation before we apply the formula. Mm-hmm. You know what I'm saying? So that you're not at a disadvantage, because we're paying you in today's dollars, not the dollars you made in 1956.
Right, which is a good thing.
Yeah. Yes, and so that's done before we even, so that we're looking at what your highest years are, but we're looking at them in present day dollars.
Well, I think the other thing, though, is that, again, to use the example of my mother-in-law, God bless her, is that she only worked part of her life. She was a housewife, throughout the 50s and 60s and most of the 70s. And we don't recognize that. And there's a lot of women, particularly widows, as is Gwen, who are in that situation. Right. But Social Security was set up not as a kind of a welfare, what's your bottom line program, to help. It was just to help you, give you income in your retirement, but it's based on the wages paid in. No, but it's called old age insurance. It's called old age poverty insurance, isn't it? Yeah, I know. Well, that's kind of gone by the wayside, because old age isn't, they call it retirement insurance. Right. But it's to supplement, say, anything else that you might have, which is why when you talk about raising the cap, because the whole program was designed for just your average wage earner to, give them something. Right. And it's like if you have a $10 million a year guy, and we're required to pay out a percentage of what he paid in, and you want him to pay on all of that, now that's going to throw the system out of whack. Right. Right. Yeah, that's the problem. I think that we need to go ahead. Oh, I was going to say the only way it seems to me to kind of fix it is to bump up the percentage a little bit, which hasn't been done for a long time, that people pay in, so that when they get it out, it's funded. Right. Well, if we did away with the cap, you'd have a huge surplus of cash. You'd have a lot. You do away with the cap, and according to Bernie Sanders, you could give everybody a 20% raise, and it would be solvent for the next 75 years. Yeah, but then you'd have to pay out $1 million a month. No, you don't. You cap the amount that you pay out. Sue, I'm sorry, we're out of time. I got to run. Hey, thanks so much for sharing our program and for reaching out to our stations and sponsors and letting them know that you're listening. It really means a lot to us. So the witch hunts really began in a big way in the 1500s as a consequence, in large part, of the Protestant Reformation. There was this competition between the Protestant churches and the Catholic churches for who could be most effective at keeping Satan at bay, in other words, punishing the witches. And it became like a competitive thing, sort of like Democrats and Republicans competing for your vote, literally, seriously. In addition, there were attacks on women who were performing abortions. Most of the abortionists in that era were women, and they were being attacked for being witches, and that was because they were denying the feudal lords who owned the serfs and their children cheap labor, which was the children. So you combine these things, and today we're seeing something very similar to both of these dynamics at play. There's a whole long rant about this over at HartmannReport.com. Check it out. 54 minutes past the hour. Welcome back. Richard in Naples, Florida. Hey, Richard, what's on your mind?
I'm in the now, Tom. Thank you so much. You were talking with what made me want to call was many calls ago now, I think it was. There's a gentleman that was talking about how he learned a specific lesson in 50 years or so ago, and you saw what he was saying because you had read what he was talking about, and you knew exactly what it was, and you obviously were in that moment. I was there with you as well. I just want to let you know I'm still in the know, and I've been going through all day in the know with you, and it's been so much fun.
Well, thank you. Is that what you called about?
Well, I just wanted to suggest that maybe artificial intelligence has a great deal to do with why I'm talking to you right now. And let me try to explain as briefly as I can. It's hard to do this briefly. I have an insight into the way that artificial intelligence is now being used in our political system. And the mere fact that I'm still talking to you is an example of what I'm saying, because I suggest to you that there is more to what we think we know than we actually know, by far.
No, I get it. Richard, I want to get one last caller in here. Thank you for the call. Lamar in Los Angeles, you wanted to speak to Jesse Waters' comments about black fathers?
Yeah. Have they ever paid any attention about how many black fathers are in prison or shot on the street like we just have with the police killings?
Yeah.
Wouldn't that contribute to fathers not being at the house?
Yeah.
If you incarcerate all of us?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a good point.
I mean, if you're going to talk about it, let's be real. Let's be up front.
Well, Jesse Waters is not going to talk about that. He's on Fox News. They don't talk about that unless it's like, see, I told you they were morally corrupt or something like that. But Lamar, excellent point. Thank you so much for calling and making it. And I'm sorry I'm out of time here. Thank you so much for being with us today. We'll be back tomorrow, same bat time, same bat channel. In the meantime, don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. It requires all of us. And there's so much you can do right now. Indivisible.org, check it out, for example, or Democrats.org.com? I'm not sure. Anyhow, check out your local Democratic Party. Call them up. Volunteer. There's things you can do. Tag You're It. We'll see you tomorrow. Have a great afternoon.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.